Welcome to the 22nd Annual Oregon Connections Telecommunications Conference. Can you believe that this is our 22nd year? I was 5 when this thing started. Our theme this year is the network of the future. It's really great to see everybody here. I'm glad you all made it safely. We missed our Indian summer this year, and I think last year. My wife was bemoaning the fact that we don't have any of that fabulous weather that we had for 3 or 4 years before that. And she's going to have to walk with an umbrella, which is so un-Oregonian. But we're glad you made it here safely. We would not be able to do this without your support, first of all. And we come pretty close to filling up this hotel and filling up this conference every year. But more than that, we couldn't do this without our sponsors. Because of their generous support, we're able to keep the price of admission remarkably low. And if you go to any other conference during the year besides this one, you know how great a deal this one is. That's because of our sponsors. They also help us pay for this venue, provide some of the prizes and gifts, and serve up excellent food and drinks throughout the conference. So we're going to recognize them right now, and I want you to please hold your applause until I finish going through each of the sponsor categories. So this year, our summit sponsors, these are the big dogs, LS Networks and Wave Business. So thank you, LS Networks and Wave Business. Our Alpine sponsors are AT&T, Hunter Communications, Infostructure, Spectrum Enterprise, Walker and Associates Incorporated, and Juniper, that's part of their name, Juniper Network. So let's thank our Alpine sponsors. Our Timberline sponsors are Cash Communications, Fatbeam, Structured, and Zayo. Thank you, folks. We appreciate you as well. And our list of Whitewater sponsors is lengthy, and that's exciting as well. So CenturyLink, the City of Eugene, Clearfield, Duraline, Fujitsu, where's my robot? The Fujitsu robot, love that. GorgeNet, NewBasis.com, the Northwest Telecommunications Association, Peak Internet, QLife, Vitro, is that Vitro? VETRO Fiber Map. I don't want to say it wrong. Vitro. Nobody's nodding, or okay, I got it right one way or the other. And then Mid-Columbia Economic Development District, McHead. They have been such a great partner in all the years that we've been here in the Gorge. And Business Oregon. So let's thank our Whitewater sponsors. Now, you may or may not know, now if you've been here more than this year, you would certainly know this, but if not, this is your first year. This whole conference is put together by volunteers. So there is no paid staff. Everyone who pulls together this conference volunteers their time and their energy and their support to do so. And so we have a planning committee, and anyone is welcome on the planning committee. We start planning for the next year's conference generally right around the first of the year. So if you are at all interested in being part of the planning committee, you can see me or see Chris Tamron or any of one of the people that I'm going to ask to stand up right now so we can recognize the folks who were on the planning committee for this year's conference. Would you please stand so we can recognize you? There's more than that, so some of them are being shy. Really do appreciate that. It generally is at least one conference call a month. Sometimes we get down to where we're doing them every other week to pull this together, but the great reward is that you get to get recognized the next year during the conference, so that's your big reward. So we'd love to have you be a part of that. Now, if you've been around for any length of time, you know that there is one person who stands above the rest in organizing this conference, and that's Chris Tamron. Chris Tamron really, and I don't know what we're going to do when he retires or wins the lottery, whichever comes first. But without Chris, none of this would happen, and those of us who are on the planning committee would run amok, I assure you. So I do want to say a special thank you to Chris Tamarin, and if you would help me in doing that by giving him a round of applause. I mentioned Mid-Columbia Economic Development District, MCED. We thank them so much for hosting this. They have been such a great partner, and it's always so nice to be here in the scenic Columbia River Gorge. And for those of you who this is your first time in the gorge since the fires, it's not nearly as bad or catastrophic as we thought, although someone added to that by lighting up the fruit factory across the river. So if you're still smelling smoke, that probably is what you're smelling. If you got here today, you may or may not know that that actually burned yesterday and was still burning this morning. So for folks in the Mid-Columbia region, that's a tragedy, and keep those folks in your thoughts and prayers. We look forward to seeing you tonight at the exhibitor fair and reception, 5:20 p.m. today, and that's in the gorge room across where we had breakfast this morning. If you need Wi-Fi access, and every year Cash Communications provides Wi-Fi access for us, and it's really fabulous. So in the Columbia room, where we are right now, search for Cash Columbia, and in the gorge room, search for Cash Gorge. The access code is Cash space Wi-Fi. Cash is all capital, Wi-Fi is capital W, lowercase I, capital F, lowercase I, and it is case sensitive, so if you don't put it in that way, it won't work. If you didn't catch that, it's in your flyer, so you can get that password there as well. The reception tonight, there will be exhibits, and I don't know if any of the cool robots will still be there, but certainly the spinners will be, unless you all run over there and get them beforehand. So lots of really cool things over there at the exhibitor fair and reception. So don't forget to stop by and thank the exhibitors. They're part of the reason that we're able to do this as well, and see what they've got to say and get some of the cool giveaways and enjoy the appetizers and a beverage or two. Or two. That's no, that's not a limit. Throughout the conference, we will be giving away the latest edition of, this is new this year, Cybersecurity for Beginners. We've been giving away the Telecom Dictionary, which is a great resource. I actually have one on my bookshelf, and I don't think I actually won it. I think Chris it was a mercy gift last year or the year before. But this year we'll be giving away Cybersecurity for Beginners and Oregon Connections USB hubs at the beginning of each session. Have you already done that, Chris? Ha! You must be in your seat to win. There you go. Wonderful. Congratulations. So if you are late to a session, you may miss your opportunity to get one of those cool prizes. You'll also want to stick around until the end of the conference on Friday, when we will be giving away, as our end of conference drawing prizes, a Zmodo Mini Wi-Fi HD wireless indoor home video security camera with two-way audio. That's really what it's titled on the packaging. An Amazon Fire HD 8 tablet computer. It's got an 8-inch HD display and 16 gigabit of storage, and a NEC-Tech solar charger. You must be present to win. There are descriptions of those in your packet as well. We also would like for you, before you leave, to turn in your conference evaluation form and a business card for the conference evaluation form drawing prize. The conference evaluation form drawing prize is a Samsung Galaxy Tab E Lite 7-inch and Sport Universal case. Those were donated by Peak Internet. Thank you very much. Please fill out the evaluation form, as it helps the planning committee, of which I'm sure all of you are going to volunteer to serve on, build next year's conference for you. Turn it in along with your business card and some other form of address indicator, or some other form of address indicator. We'll send the Galaxy Tab E case to the winner and post the name on the website. We appreciate and use your feedback. You can also complete the survey online, but if you complete the survey online, you aren't entered into the prize drawing. So doing it the old-fashioned way gets you in the drawing. You can find that link posted on the evaluation form in your packet. Just a couple of additional comments, and I'll introduce our most fabulous and most famous keynote speaker. Please make a note that we'll be back here again next year at the Hood River Inn and Conference Center, October 18th and 19th for the 23rd Oregon Connections Telecommunications Conference. And this is big news, so you can plan ahead. We're actually excited to announce that the 24th Annual Oregon Connections Conference, so not next year, but the following year, will actually be hosted by the Southern Oregon Regional Economic Development, Inc., So Ready in the Medford-Ashland area. So a change of venue, not next year, but the following year. Watch our website, OregonConnections.info, for more information. Additionally, following the conference, presentations will be posted on the website, so if you miss something or you get distracted or you're networking or you're playing with your fidget spinner and you want to go back and rewatch something, those will be available on the website. And then lastly, as a courtesy to those around you, and I'm going to do this right now because I hadn't done it yet, take out your phone and set it to vibrate or silent, or as John Irwin was so eager to say, personal taser standby, I think. So he has a special, I'm pretty sure he has a phone that will actually do that. So thank you very much. So now it is my great pleasure to introduce you to our 2017 keynote speaker, the bald futurist, Mr. Steve Brown. Now, how many people can pick him out in a crowd? So we were picking on him a little bit about that, and he said, it's just good branding. And I have to admit that it is good branding. Everybody needs a brand. I suspect his comments and his wise deductions about the future are going to brand him even more so than his lack of hair. So he is an accomplished speaker, an author, strategist, and executive coach. So when we get done with this, he's going to coach me about how to introduce people properly. And he's also the former futurist and chief evangelist at the Intel Corporation. What a cool title. Do you have one of those business cards framed? Because that's a cool title. I love that. With 30 years of experience in high tech that spans research, engineering, marketing, manufacturing, and management, Steve helps companies to decide the future and then build winning strategies designed to create new value, optimize operations, and take full advantage of the latest technology platforms. We're very pleased to have him here today. You can find his full bio in your program if you want more additional information on him. So Steve, we're glad you're here. Thank you for coming. Let's welcome Mr. Brown.
Morning, everybody. And I'm not a podium guy. Hopefully that's okay. I'm going to move out here into the light. How about that? So good morning. Back in the summer of 2010, an ailing Steve Jobs declared that we were entering the post-PC era. What he meant by that was not that PCs were going away. I'm presenting to you off one right now. But what he meant was that the primary way that people would interact with digital information and services was going to be something other than the PC. And that's what's come to pass. We all use our smartphones, our tablets, all manner of mobile devices to interact with digital information and services. What I want to talk about today is what does the world look like when we move to the post-mobile era? As we move into the post-mobile era, it doesn't mean that mobile phones will go away. We're still going to be using our smartphones. They are the remote controls of modern life. But we will be interacting with digital information and services. It's hard. When you're a futurist in the digital world and you can't say the word digital, it's really tricky. Anyway, I'll get through it as best I can. The digital domain, the way we will interact with it will be devices and methods other than mobile. That is going to put an incredible strain on the network because it's going to lead us to all manner of new applications, new ways of using technology, and that's what I want to talk about today. We all know that there's going to be an exponential increase in demand for data. The question is, why? What is that demand coming from? How will we be using technology in the future? And that's what I do for a living. So I'm a futurist, kind of a weird title. What it means is I think about the confluence of a number of different trends. Technology trends, business trends, so business model trends, how does the technology get paid for, but also what new business models does that technology enable? What's the ecosystem into which that technology is being deployed, and how will that either speed things up or slow things down? But most importantly, thinking about people. How will people use technology to do things in their lives? What problems will it solve? What things are people afraid of that are going to make the technology adoption slow down? So that's what I do as a futurist. What I want to bring you today is three things. First is to walk you through what I think are the big technology disruptors. I spend my time, I probably do about half my day, is just doing research. Just trying to understand and keep up with developments in technology. So I'll walk you through what some of those are. And these are the ones that I think are going to put a strain on the network, which is what you really care about. Secondly, I want to walk you through how these are going to be used by different business sectors. So we'll talk through healthcare and manufacturing and retail, that sort of thing. And then wrap it up with what is the opportunity for data? How is data going to get used even more in the future? And then we'll wrap it up. Okay. So let's start off with the technology disruptors. But before we do that, I just want to give you some context to remind you just how far we have come. You can probably tell from my outrageous British accent that I'm not from round these here parts. I've lived in Portland now for just a shade over 20 years. That's my home. But 20 years ago, when I first moved here, none of these companies, none of these products, none of these services existed. And yet look at this sea of brands. These are all products that are they now make up our modern lives. I'm sure there are many on this slide here that are all things that you rely on. They're just part of the way you live your life now. And yet, 20 years ago, none of them existed. How did that happen? Another way to think about this is that the fastest computer on the planet in 1987 was this Cray 2 supercomputer. It didn't really connect to other computers very much. So everything it did was in that room with these two trendy-looking people with fancy haircuts. It cost $16 million, and yet it has about half the performance, the compute performance of an Apple Watch, which is spewing out data all day long. So the compute landscape, the communications landscape has changed dramatically in that time frame. And it's only going to continue. You're going to have more powerful, smaller, cheaper devices that create more and more data and consume more and more data. So we've moved from the PC era to the mobile era. The question is, what is next? What does this post-mobile era look like? What's the thing? What's the next thing? And the answer is, there is no next thing. But what we're going to move to is a landscape of a brand new cloud, new modalities that we communicate with that cloud information, and then a whole new set of endpoints. So the cloud, as we know it, traditional cloud services of storage, compute, will still be there, but they're going to be turbocharged with all sorts of new capabilities. The ability to manage the blockchain, which we'll talk about in a minute. The ability to run artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning type of functions. Conversational computing, whatever social networking turns into. So the cloud is going to look very different, and it's going to be even more useful for people trying to achieve things. So they're going to be tapping the cloud, using the communications infrastructure a lot more than they have in the past. The way that we will communicate with compute devices is going to change as well. The primary display will become the world, not screens, because the screens will go into our glasses. We're going to communicate a lot more with voice, a lot more with gesture. Touch will still be around, but it will not be the primary modality for communicating with digital information services in the future. And the thing that we use is going to be, yes, mobile will still be around, but there'll be all manner of new devices, new endpoints that will be consuming and spewing out data. I'm going to talk about a lot of these. So that's sort of the broad landscape of where we're going. A lot more that's going to be connected to the network. Let's start with the Internet of Things. This is this idea of anything that is smart and connected to the internet. Already maybe about 15 billion devices, heading very quickly to 50, 100, and beyond there. What's really happening here, and the way I find that's very helpful to think about this, is that we're connecting the digital and the physical worlds in ever more intimate ways. So we're putting the digital world and connecting it in billions and then trillions of touch points, so that the digital world understands what is happening in the physical world and then can act upon that. What it's enabling us to do is to essentially make the physical world programmable. To make the physical world programmable so that we can do more with it. We can make it more responsive to human needs. And to do that requires lots and lots of connectivity, because you're constantly connecting back and forth between the physical and the digital world. SAP estimates that by 2030, there will be 100 trillion sensors on the planet, the nervous system of planet Earth. And what do those sensors look like? It's what you'd expect, everything from temperature sensors and moisture sensors and microphones and cameras, but it's also other things you wouldn't think of as sensors. A Wi-Fi hotspot is a sensor, for example. In Starbucks in China, they use the Wi-Fi hotspot in their cafes to sniff the MAC addresses of people's phones and figure out how many people are in the store, and they change the music depending on how many people are in the store. If it's quiet, they put on chilled out music to get people to stay a bit longer. If it's busy, they play more high energy music to get people the hell out. So Twitter is a sensor, Facebook is a sensor. There are ways of figuring out what is happening in the physical world so that the digital world can act upon that. When I think about IoT, there's really three main categories of applications. The first one I call service portals, we'll talk about in a second. This is the idea that you have an object that becomes smart, and because it's smart and connected, it can do more than it could. Let's actually talk about that now. The reason I have a picture of a teddy bear there, think about teddy bears. How many of you had a teddy bear when you were a child? Okay. How many of you still have a teddy bear now? I knew Joe would be the guy that would be like, yeah, that's me. Now, the primary function of a teddy bear is to provide comfort to a child. What if you could make a teddy bear smart and connected? What could you do with a smart, connected teddy bear? What if you could put some cameras in teddy bear's eyes that enabled him to do optical character recognition on a book? You could then have a teddy bear that could read a book aloud to a child. Now, those of you who are parents or grandparents will think, well, that's awful, and you'd be right, because it's important for parents to bond with their children over book time. But what if you've read the book 3 or 4 times, and you want to just hand off to Teddy, because you know there's a cold glass of beer in the fridge waiting for you downstairs? No, you should always read your book to a child. But what if Teddy Bear can be connected to a language translation service, so that you can have a book written in English and have Teddy read the book aloud to your child in French or Chinese and teach them a new language? Suddenly Teddy Bear's looking interesting now. He has become a product through which you now sell a service. It's a service portal. Now, how much is Teddy Bear worth? $200, $300. Maybe he's $50, but the reading service, that's $5 a month. If you want the language packs for Europe, that's another $5 a month. You want Asian language packs, another $5 a month. Suddenly you can start to sell this teddy bear in a completely different way. So many companies are motivated to create new revenue streams by making objects smart and selling services through them. Selling services through them means bandwidth. Control loops. This is the idea that you make the world programmable. I have an example of a sprinkler here. When it's not rained for a while, you might turn the sprinkler on. You might check the weather forecast. It makes you intelligent. You do a control loop. Should I be watering the grass? Should I turn the sprinkler on or off? Finally, there's this idea of business process augmentation, that you take a business process, you figure out what's happening in a business process in real time, and you automate that process or semi-automate that process, and you coordinate activity back and forth between algorithms, robots, and humans. And we'll come to that thought later on in this presentation. So these are the main categories of IoT. These are the disruptive ones that will create huge amounts of value and huge amounts of bandwidth. Here's an example of, so a friend of mine who works at MIT Media Lab, David Rose, Dr. David Rose, awesome guy. He has a lab where they've created some of what he calls enchanted objects. Now they are smart connected objects that have a service that they kind of sell through them. So I just want to, they're silly examples, but they're awesome examples because they seem so trivial and yet they're so brilliant. And I brought them because I thought they would illuminate you, okay, well if they're going to do that, then imagine what else we're going to do. So this is a smart connected wallet. How many of you have a trouble with spending on your credit card just a little too much once in a while? The problem with the credit card is you're not getting a feedback on how your spending is going. So you just swipe, 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 and then you get the credit card statement, and you're, oh no, why did I do that? You don't have that feedback. This is a wallet which is connected to your bank account in real time. It has a variable strength hinge on the wallet. So as you try and open it to spend, you get immediate feedback to know, should I be doing this or not? We live in the Pacific Northwest. It rains here once in a while. Your wife, concerned about the rain. This is a smart umbrella. Rather than have to figure out if it's going to rain today by pulling out your phone, pecking through your apps, finding the weather app, opening it up, scrolling down, is it going to rain today? Should I take my umbrella? It's a lengthy process. This umbrella is automatically connected to the internet, and the soft blue glow on the edge of the handle tells you, take me with you, it's going to rain today. So a simple, trivial, embedded design, simple service flowing through an object. You're going to see an awful lot of this in the next 10 years. Now, one of the issues with this is that these devices that people are going to want to buy that are smart and connected, they're not going to want to pay very much for them. Now, the good news is that Moore's law will make computing and communications hardware cheaper, but people are still going to be tempted to build the end objects as cheaply as they can, which means once we get to 5G and the latency drops and the bandwidth goes up even more, they'll be tempted to push as much compute up into the cloud. See, like the teddy bear, you'd have very little in that teddy bear. All the translation, all the language processing is happening in the cloud. This is a dinosaur toy you can buy online from Cognitoys. You can have a conversation with it. It's aimed at sort of 5, 6-year-old kids. It's a piece of plastic, a switch, a microphone, and an internet connection. Everything else, all of the intelligence for this happens in the cloud. So as we move to 5G, we're going to have this paradox where objects are going to seem smarter and smarter, but they're actually dumb, because all the compute is happening in the cloud and very little is happening locally for cost reasons. So that's going to put an even stronger load onto the internet. So control loops, I talked about the sprinkler here, and the smarter that these control loops get, the more we are able to program the world and make the world more conducive to human needs. And then business process augmentation, this is the idea that you map what is happening in the physical world inside the digital world, and then figure out how the digital world can help to move things along. So this is this similar idea in cyber-physical systems. So let's get into some of the technologies that I think are going to make a real difference in terms of creating demand for your networks in the coming decade or two. A lot being talked about artificial intelligence. If you read the press anytime, it's either artificial intelligence is going to destroy jobs or artificial intelligence is going to kill us all. Both of those may be true. We will find out. But artificial intelligence is not something that is coming. It's something that's already all around you. You use it almost every day. I'll give you some examples. Pattern recognition, face recognition, object recognition, speech recognition, natural language processing. How many of you have a Facebook account and post photographs to it? Okay, so when it automatically recognizes a face, that's artificial intelligence working in the background. How many of you have Amazon Alexa or a Google Assistant, something like that, and you talk to it. Okay, so you're using AI there to understand what you're saying and try and act upon that. So you're already using AI. AI and machine learning is already being used to do credit reports, to do fingerprint analysis, to do DNA testing, all kinds of stuff. In the future, it's going to be used a lot for prediction. BlackRock, which has, I don't know, $1.3 trillion worth of funds under management, is shifting over to using AI as a way to pick stocks. So they have about $300 billion that are in robo-funds now, because it turns out that about 11% of their human-managed mutual funds do better than the market. That's the kind of track record that humans have. We're not very good at stock picking. Robots are a lot better at it. So prediction, decision support in businesses, diagnostics. You're going to see a huge breakthrough in diagnostics in the medical communities in the next 20 years. The role of doctors is going to diminish in terms of their ability to figure out what's wrong with you, because they will have a lot of help from AI, and they're going to have to up their bedside manner for a change. AI is also, when you put it inside a physical object, it gives a physical object agency. It gives it the ability to make decisions and interact with the world. That's what an autonomous machine is about, and we'll talk about a few of those in a few minutes. And then finally, virtual personal assistants. How many of you use Siri or Alexa or Google Assistant? Okay, it's frustrating as hell, right? They're not very good today. In the next few years, they're going to become dramatically better because of the advances in AI. And advances in AI come from gathering more and more and more data and managing that and storing and processing that data. That data is all going to be sucked out of the world, and all of that's going to flow across your networks. So I talked about virtual personal assistants. We're going to move to an era where you're going to talk to your computers a lot more in the next 5 years, because they're going to actually understand you a lot better than they have. You won't have the frustrating experience that you have today. There are lots of voice-enabled devices that are coming to market. They're either in your pockets and purses today, or they're starting to be sort of propagated around your homes. These are connected to a range of virtual personal assistants and conversational platforms. All the major brands are now racing to build a storefront in these conversational platforms, so that you as a consumer can interact with those brands by voice. Lots more data flowing back and forth than typed text. And it's to interact with all of these new services. All of these I show here are all voice-enabled products and services. Gartner predicts that by 2019, 20% of smartphone user interactions will take place via virtual personal assistants. And by 2020, the majority of devices that will be designed to function with minimal or zero touch. So you'll be able to use touch if you want, but you will have the option to talk to your devices instead. So we're moving to a world where objects will not only be able to communicate with you by voice, but you will be able to imagine that they have a personality. So with AI behind the scenes, you can start to put characters into your objects. So I picked this washing machine because how many of you enjoy programming your washing machine with all the dials and buttons? It's stupid. I just want to say, here, wash my underpants. It should be that easy, right? Oh, or is there anything in here which needs bleaching? There should be a conversation back and forth with my washing machine. Why isn't it like that? And when I talk to companies like Disney and Warner Brothers, they are figuring out ways to embody characters in an AI and then have that embedded into an object, whether that is a child's toy or a washing machine. And they're going to license those characters. So suddenly you're going to have people having conversations with SpongeBob SquarePants in their washing machine, and that's going to create a huge amount of data. Robots. Robots are getting smarter. What I mean by smarter is that robots were traditionally things that built our cars, and they were trapped inside cages in factories. Now, they were trapped inside cages because they were not safe to be out in the real world around humans, because robots are big, powerful machines. If the human gets close, they could get hurt because the robots could not see the humans. That's what's changed. With the advances in AI, in object recognition, in image processing, now computers can see, hear, and understand the world around them. Doing that requires lots of data. But they now are smart enough to inhabit the spaces that we inhabit. And so you're seeing this revolution in robotics where suddenly they're showing up in all manner of applications. And as we go through the business section of this talk, I'll run you through some of the examples of where they're showing up. But you're seeing robots in almost every industrial sector because of this breakthrough in AI. A robot that flies is a drone. What's changing with drones is that they are no longer things that you use to take photographs of the top of your house. That's what most people think about them for. But they are now powerful enough to pull you on a surfboard and allow you to wakeboard behind a drone. I've seen videos of people using them to do snowboarding as well. They're starting to get arms so they can interact with the world. They can do safety applications. They're strong enough now to pull a heavy man that's weighted down with water out of the sea. So they'll be used for rescue applications. And this is a drone with a flamethrower on it. So people in the audience are like, yeah, that's great. Now, why would you have a drone with a flamethrower? This is used in China for where they have power lines that get some debris on them. Rather than send a poor guy up on a ladder, potentially going to zap himself up there or fall down, they just send up a drone with a flamethrower and burn it off. Sweet. So drones are being increasingly going to be deployed, and increasingly they're going to be autonomous. And because they're autonomous, that means they have huge data traffic needs as they talk back and forth. You're essentially going to see air traffic control become software running on the network. And of course, drones for dogs. So we're going to come to other sorts of drones in a few minutes, but this is an area to watch. I was, even a year, 2 years ago, I was like, well, drones, it's a very small market. It's going to be a huge marketplace. Another technology that is people are talking about a lot right now, and rightly so, is blockchain. As a strategic planner and futurist for 20 years or so, every once in a while a technology comes by that you think, oh, this is the big one. When HTML and the web came out, it's like, oh, okay, this is a big one. HTML and the web is to information sharing as blockchain is to transactions and trust. This is a big one. If you don't know or have not heard about blockchain yet, or you only know a little bit, I encourage you to learn more, because blockchain is a transformational technology. What it enables you to do, without going into the details of the protocol, how it works, it is essentially a database that's distributed and tied together with military-grade encryption. What it enables you to do is to establish transactions and store the information about them in a way that cannot be changed. What it enables you to do is to establish trust between two strangers in a way that has not been possible before. Now, the way we have done that before is we've always had a third party. So if I owe Joe money, I would get his bank account information, I would go online, I send him $100, whatever it is, and my bank decreases $100 from my account, and then his bank agrees to also at the same time increase $100 in his account. There's trust there. Brokering that trust is something that blockchain can help us do without going into the finer details. Blockchain is like an hour conversation in itself. What it means is that underwriters, exchanges, like stock exchanges, notaries, escrow, auditors, are all potentially at risk from an employment perspective. But it also means we're going to start doing much more free transactions electronically online. So this, again, is going to put a strain and an increase on traffic on the internet. And blockchain can be used in all manner of things. It's what underpins Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. but it is going to be used to do authentication, identity. I would not be surprised if your passport is somehow based on blockchain 15 years from now. It's going to show up everywhere. Hopefully, it will also be used to underpin the democracy by underpinning our electronic voting system as well. So blockchain, I don't have any time to talk about it more, but it is a big, 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 big deal. It will generate a lot of traffic. The final area of technology I want to talk about before we get into the business sectors is hacking our perception. We are going to personalize the way that we view the world in the next 5 years. We already create our own little echo chambers with the websites we go to, and Facebook helps us to build our own little bubbles. We're going to actually have our own perception of the world, be able to edit the world and see it and probably hear it the way that we want to. And we're going to do that because we've invented virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality technologies that change our perception of the world, and largely our visual perception, but also the way that we hear the world. There are what I call hearables, so wearable technology, computers in your ear that will let you selectively edit what you want to hear. So if you're on a plane and there's a screaming baby, you just turn down the volume knob on the baby, you'll hear everything else, but you won't hear the screaming child. If you're on the New York subway and you hear the screech of the rails, you don't want to hear that, just turn it down. And people are even talking about hearables where you'll be able to create your own personal network. So if you are, say you're in this room and you want to talk quietly to each other instead of having to whisper in the ear, or if you're in a loud nightclub or a concert and you're trying to shout in someone's ear next to you, you just have your hearables in and you'll be able to hear each other perfectly just talking normally because you've set up a personal network with your friends. So we're going to hack our perception of the world to give you a feel for where we're at today, the beginnings of this revolution. A short video. How many of you have tried virtual reality? Okay, about half. So a lot more people are going to try it. Facebook just announced their Oculus headset at $199. Microsoft, Google, Apple, all rumored to be working hard on augmented reality headsets that let you overlay digital information on the physical world. It is a big deal, and it's going to create an awful lot of network traffic. So the state that we're in at the moment, virtual reality is pretty amazing. If you've tried it and you've tried good VR, I'm not talking about the VR where you put a phone into a headset. That's not good VR. It's okay VR, but it's not the full immersive experience. If you have good VR experience, this happens to you. But even though it's amazing now, it is still at the beginning. Anybody remember this game? Wolfenstein 3D, 1992. 25 golden years ago. It was an awesome, awesome game. You got to shoot Nazis, fantastic. It was 320 by 240 graphics in 16 glorious colors. And it was, at the time, it was the most amazing thing anybody ever seen. Have you seen Wolfenstein? It's amazing. That's where we're at with virtual reality today. We have a long ways to go in terms of the reality, the fidelity, the detail in what we see, moving towards volumetric video. Volumetric video allows you, instead of seeing a video which is static around where the video was taken from, you actually can move your head and look around inside the video. Huge, huge amounts of data required for that. And then VR is going to become streaming, the same way that video is streaming through Netflix today. VR, AR, and MR will become streaming over your networks. This is why this is a huge bandwidth hog. Applications will become objects, digital objects that inhabit our worlds. That's going to require a bunch of data to be streamed. So that's the sort of the building block technologies. Now let's look at how they're going to be used to solve actual problems for actual people in our industries. So let's do agriculture and food to begin with. We've done pretty well. Back in the 60s, we were concerned that we were not going to feed all the people on the planet. Oh my God, the S-curve, the population. We've done okay. Hunger has at least come down globally. We still have 1 billion people that go to bed hungry at night, half of them children. So we have a gap to close, but we've made good progress. We're going to need to get smarter about the way that we grow our food and the way that we distribute our food. And so here's a few ideas on things that are happening. This is a project that's being run in the UK. It's called the Hands-Free Hectare. They don't measure lands in acres there. It's hectares because it's metric. And they have this hectare of field, and they have grown barley on this field. What's interesting about this project is not a single human hand was involved in sowing the barley, nurturing the barley, or harvesting that barley. It's all done by robots and drones. This is the way farms of the future will be. This is another farm of the future. This is a hydroponic farm growing lettuce and other leafy greens in cities, in a warehouse. If you want local, there's nothing much more local than next door. So this approach uses 95% less land and 90% less water than growing crops the old way. What's interesting about these approaches is that they are highly networked, and there are a lot of control loops and sensors going on there spewing out data, because what they're trying to find is the ultimate recipe to grow each crop. And so they are trying different recipes, different sets of nutrients, different temperatures, different moisture levels, and then looking at the plant and seeing how does it grow. And so they're looking at that information and they're comparing it with everybody else's information. So there's a lot of data being generated out of these types of farms. And they're not just happening like this in warehouses, they're also being built inside shipping containers. This is a company called Freight Farms that builds a whole hydroponic farm inside a shipping container. And then as you grow your farm, you just buy another shipping container. This is a robot called Harvey. Harvey's cute. Harvey has buddies, and Harvey works in teams with other robots to thin out plants at a nursery. Typically back-breaking work for migrant labor. Now it's done by robots working in a little team. They are completely autonomous. To do what they do, they have to talk to each other. That's generating traffic on your networks. This is a fun one. Smart cows. I think I first heard about this from a Microsoft speaker who spoke about this in this room. So I won't spend too much time talking about this, but the reason I like this, the idea here is that by looking at how many steps a cow takes, you can figure out when she's literally hot to trot. Because when the cow walks twice as fast, that means she's an estrus and ready to be having some time with a bull. Okay, all right. I think you know what I'm saying here. Some cow on bull action. Anyway, this is a great example of if you if you have that data, it's transformational to your ability to plan and make good decisions in your business. It's not always clear what the data is that you're looking for. So you just have to gather lots of data and look for patterns. In this case, gathering data about how quickly the cow moves around tells you whether she's ready to go or not. Who knew? So gathering data in all businesses as much as you can, even if you don't know why you're gathering it, and then analyzing that data is going to help you find patterns to move your business forward. It happened in the dairy industry, in the beef industry. It's going to happen everywhere else too. This is going to mean people will gather data they don't even need, and it's all going to go over your networks. Healthcare. Healthcare is going through, finally, a revolution. Because of all the regulations, and rightly so, in the healthcare industry, they're a bit slower to move than other sectors. Education is probably the other one that's the laggard here. They are about to go through a major change in the next 20 years. You see a nice image of a surgeon wearing a HoloLens headset here, so they're getting augmented reality help and full gesture control as they're doing surgeries. That's interesting. We'll see where that goes. But there are some much more powerful thoughts on how we might use technology differently to help people be healthier. One of them is this idea of longitudinal health records. I have a friend who's an MD and a forward thinker in the world of healthcare. And her view is that today we are accidentally well. We're well and we don't really know why. And then we get sick or chronically sick and we treat that sickness. But what we're not doing is figuring out the people that are well, why? It's just an accident, it seems like. Oh, you're lucky. We know there's some genetics, of course, that plays in this. But to understand what people's habits are and to grab the data from that, and we've all read these studies, drink more red wine, drink more coffee, you'll live longer. No, don't drink wine. Don't drink coffee. No, it'll kill you. They change all the time because we don't really know. The idea of the longitudinal health record is to gather your life signs through your life, to understand what you're eating, what you're drinking, what exercise you're taking, what other habits you have, and start to build a personal record of your own health, your own wellness. Doing that's going to require storing and gathering a ton of data. It's going to go over your networks. Precision medicine saved my friend's life, actually. So my friend Eric Dishman, he is the head of the Health Institute of Health team on precision medicine. He was the head of the healthcare business at Intel. And he had kidney cancer for many years. And he was close to going. And a donor was found and he was fine. But he almost didn't make it to becoming a candidate to receive a donor kidney. And the reason that he did make it was because of some breakthrough treatment he was given as a result of him going through the precision medicine process. Precision medicine says, let's understand you as an individual at the genetic level. So understand you and your DNA, sequence that DNA to figure out how to treat you better, more accurately. They'd been giving him kidney cancer drugs for 5 years. Didn't really help. Because it turns out that cancer is not cancer. It's not kidney cancer and pancreatic cancer and liver cancer and brain cancer. There's Joe's cancer and Steve's cancer and Chris's cancer. It's all individual. So with my friend Eric, they sequenced his genome. They sequenced the genome of his tumor. And they were able to figure out, after analyzing that for about 6 weeks with lots of big fat computers, that the drug that he needed was actually one that was used typically to treat pancreatic cancer. They gave him that. He recovered enough that he was able to undergo surgery, have a new kidney, and now he's fine. Now, to do that, to sequence his genome and the genome of his tumor, which is different, that's why things go wrong, they were shuffling back and forth across the country. They were shipping multiple 3 terabyte hard drives with the information about his genes. Once this becomes much more common, Eric was on the forefront and an experimental patient. Once this becomes common for literally millions of people, we're not going to be shipping 3 terabyte hard drives across the country. It's going to go over your network. Diagnostic AI is coming. AI is very good at seeing patterns in seas of data. If you give it enough examples, it will figure things out very quickly. I have a friend who lives in my building. His name is Joseph, and he is a radiologist. And I had to take him aside a couple of years ago and say, Joseph, you do know your job's going away, right? And he's pale. And what do you mean? What do you mean he's going away? I explained to him about deep learning and how it works, and that if you get enough examples, no matter how complex the task is, and remember, Joseph went to medical school for 7 years and then did 2 years of residency, probably dropped $500,000 on his education to become a radiologist. And I'm telling him he's going to be replaced by a piece of software. If you give enough examples, in this case, CAT scans or x-rays, and you have marked those examples, this is one that shows a tumor, this one that doesn't, you can train an algorithm, a deep learning algorithm running on a neural network, to do a pretty damn good job. And they're getting to the point where they're already at the level that a human radiologist is. And I told my friend Joseph, I said, first of all, it's going to show up as an assistant that just helps you. Just a second opinion. Then eventually, it's going to get so good that they won't need you anymore. And he went even paler and he said, we just got an assistant last month. So I told him the clock's ticking. So this is an easier task than some pieces of medicine. I don't mean to diminish what Joseph and other radiologists do. It's an amazing thing that they do. But it will be one of the first diagnostic tasks that AI takes over. Now, nobody wants to be told that they have stage 4 liver cancer by a robot. So there will always be doctors because we want to have that human-to-human interaction. But a lot of diagnostic AI is going to happen in the mind of a computer. And it's going to require sucking in lots and lots of data. This is sort of, dental is medical. This is a really fun example. This is a smart toothbrush. Does it sound stupid to you? Smart toothbrush, what? It gives you feedback on how to brush your teeth better. So it connects to an app on your phone, and it measures how well you're brushing your teeth. Again, doesn't sound very exciting. But the guy behind Beam Dental who created this has built a whole dental service around it because he is able to see that you brush your teeth and you brush them properly, morning and night, 7 days a week. He knows that you're taking care of your teeth. His risk on you is diminished. And so instead of offering dental insurance for $50 a month, he's able to do it for $35 a month. Sound interesting now? So gathering this kind of data and feeding it back so that someone can keep an eye on what you're doing can reduce your premiums. Again, lots of data on the network. Drones are being used in healthcare. Here's an example of a drone that is being used in Rwanda where there are very remote villages, there is a need for drugs, in this case for blood, and this is a drone where they take the blood supply that is needed, they load it inside a little box, they stick it inside this drone, they catapult it into the air, it flies out into the remote village it needs to go to, circles around, does a drop, and then comes back. The guy who's receiving the blood gets an alert on his phone to say, go and stand outside. He goes outside, blood's waiting for him, he goes, picks it up, takes it, gives it to the patient whose life he then saves. This is why I'm saying drones are going to be a big deal. Even in a city where you need to get a defib machine to somebody and it's busy traffic and the ambulance can't get through, the drone will get there quicker. In education, we're going to educate people differently. By creating feedback loops where you can have sensors in the room to track whether a student is paying attention, whether they are tracking what's going on. Are they taking notes at the pace of the other students? Is the eye contact there? Are they really getting this? Getting that feedback loop, we'll start to be able to deliver personalized education where we educate people at the pace that they can take it and we help to reinforce their learning and understanding. Slightly different example, but we are going to put a bunch of people out of work in the next 15 years. Truck drivers are they're not going to be around for much longer. Trucks will drive themselves and won't need humans 15 years from now. That's 3.5 million people in this country who rely on driving for a living. 29 out of 50 states in the US, including Oregon, truck driving or driving of some sort, delivery driver, taxi driver, is the #1 job. What are they all going to do? We're going to need to retrain them and retrain them quickly and effectively. One of the techniques that I think is going to be interesting is this idea of creating an augmented worker where you show the person what they need to do next. It's like real-time training on the job. Move this valve to here. Unscrew this here. So that people who are truck drivers who need help to find another profession, they may not have the time or the luxury to go through a long training course. Maybe they just strap on the headset, it shows them on the job. They become a partner with the technology to give them the skills that they need. It's not quite the Matrix where they shove it in the back of your head and suddenly you can do jiu-jitsu, but it's getting that way. Oh, manufacturing. So manufacturing has taken advantage of automation the last 20, 30 years, but it's going to go to the next level. And we have this idea of Industry 4.0, largely an idea that's come out of Germany, which is the leading industrial country on the planet. That's why we buy our cars from there and other high-end engineered objects. This is the idea of cyber-physical systems, where in your factory you map digitally every single thing that is happening in that factory in real time, so that you have a digital model which completely mirrors what is happening in the factory. It tracks the goods going through the factory, it tracks what every machine is doing, it tracks the status of that machine, so that you can predict in advance when a machine might break and do preventative maintenance, so you keep your manufacturing line up. All of that spews out tremendous amounts of data in real time. And robots are going to become much more common in the kind of manufacturing environments that formerly could not afford them. So small shops that might be here in Hood River that just never had a robot, now they might do. This is a robot called Baxter. It costs $22,000, and you don't need to program him in the formal programming language. You just move his arms and say step 1. Then you move his arm again and say this is step 2. Grab here. Pretty clever stuff. And we're going to move to a world of distributed manufacturing. This is going to generate a ton of data for you too. This is the idea that an individual who has a good idea will be able to form a company, design and ship products with help from all of these different people that they will never meet. So let's say her name is Jenny. I don't know, I just made that up. So Jenny here has an idea. Oh, it's for a talking teddy bear that reads a book to a child. There you go. She has an idea. She gets funding from the cloud. There's it's called Kickstarter or Indiegogo. They're already there. There's a design cloud where she gets help from people who know how to design these objects. She's not a designer, but now we have a design cloud. A test cloud, software that takes her design file, which is going to be, it doesn't really exist yet, but a design file that has all the details of her design, and it puts it through UL testing, UL CSA certification, all those things in the mind of a computer. Certifies it for sale. It then goes out to bid at all these different manufacturers who receive her design and bid on how much they would charge to make the volume that she needs. They then drop ship to the distribution cloud that distribute all the product to all the people who want to buy it all over the world. She doesn't have to touch anything. This idea of distributed manufacturing is coming, and as you can imagine, the amount of data that has to flow back and forth between these entities is enormous. Construction is transforming. You're seeing people here with daiquiri headsets on that give them an augmented reality view so they can see, well, where should the conduit go? What's the design show me should go right here? Where does the plumbing come through? This is a robot called Sam 100. He's a bricklaying robot. He can lay bricks 3 times as fast as a man or a woman. The only thing he can't do is, it's messy, so somebody has to come by and just clean up the mortar after him. But 3 times as fast as a human. And buildings are now starting to be made smart. This is a little brick that goes in your electrical system that is able to use AI to figure out what appliances you're using. and then use that information to help you. So for example, if you measure, it can look at the sense on the electric power. It'll see a signature when your dishwasher comes on. It'll figure out, well, you ordered 80 dishwasher tabs from Amazon, you've run your dishwasher 75 times, I'm going to automatically order you another set of 80 dishwasher tabs. Transport and logistics. This is a huge area of transformation. Human mobility will be changed forever starting next year. Autonomous trucks, I already talked about. Every major truck company is figuring out how to get rid of the driver, or at least give the driver a break so they can drive longer distances. Autonomous shipping. This is a ship. It is a rendering at this point, but the ship is due to go into the water in 2018. It'll be the world's first autonomous and electric ship. It will do a run back and forth, running fertilizer in Norway on a 37-mile journey. Initially, it'll start out with people on board, but by 2020, completely autonomous. It takes about 100 shipping containers. This will scale up over time as regulations allow. So our seas will be fully autonomous. We won't be risking the lives of our sailors. Probably 50 years from now, we won't have any sailors on the ocean. And Maersk, huge shipping line, is using blockchain to take all of that paperwork that they do for shipping manifests, gone. All goes onto blockchain, all goes electronic, all of that information then flowing over your networks. Autonomous vehicles are a very big deal. People are still a little skeptical about them, a little nervous about them, but they will change the way that we move around because they will save people's lives. That's the primary reason. 1.25 million people a year are killed on the roads, 40,000 in America alone. It's a big deal, and something like $75 billion worth of property damage is done annually in America alone because of car wrecks. About 90% of those are caused by humans. So just that will drive this alone, but it also means that our cities will look different. We won't need as much car parking because these things are largely shared devices. It's better for the environment. We're going to move towards electric. It's a big, big deal. And it will allow us to do different things while we're in transit. I drove an hour here from Portland. I'd love to kick back and watch a bit of TV on the way, wouldn't you? Or have a business meeting, have a video conference in the car on the way. Now, these things are generating huge amounts of data and consuming huge amounts of data. This is the latest Tesla. It has all these different sensors in it. They've already driven billions of miles in the Teslas that are on the road. It's not like Tesla has, there are not a lot of Teslas out there. But they generate huge amounts of data. Intel estimates that a connected car, an autonomous connected car, will generate 4,000 gigabytes, so 4 terabytes of data in a day. Oh, don't know what happened there. So huge amounts of data will be generated by these cars, and we're going to flip over to those within about 15 years. That's about how quickly the entire fleet turns over. If you combine a car with a drone, you get a passenger drone. Now, a few years ago, I was very skeptical about this. I'm actually on an Intel video saying that flying cars aren't going to happen anytime soon. I was wrong. I'm tracking about a dozen companies in the US, Germany, China, Czech Republic that have a viable path to creating flying cars. In this case, they call them passenger drones. The reason this is happening is that the batteries that we've got out of our Priuses, more efficient motors, electric motors that have come from developments in electric cars, all of the technology and flight control systems from the drones that take the pictures at the top of your house, all of this new technology is combining to give us the ability to build flying cars for the first time. So first trials of some of these cars will start in Dubai and Singapore this year. They're all going to need to talk to each other. Like I said before, air traffic control is going to become software, and it's going to run on your networks.
Will they have flamethrowers?
Flamethrowers optional. This is another type of transportation and logistics that I think is fascinating. It's from a company called Starship Technologies. This is the company that
The people that started this company are the people behind Skype and before that PayPal. They kind of know what they're doing. So there's good pedigree here. It's a robot with 6 wheels on it, and it's designed to move autonomously down the sidewalk. And it can have up to 2 bags of shopping inside it. So it lives inside a van, which drives into a central area where deliveries need to be made. The robots come out, the driver loads the robots, and they come out of the van, off the ramp, and off they go. And they just head down the sidewalk, they avoid people and hazards, and eventually they get to your front door, they call you to say I'm outside, you open up the top, you type in a code, you pull out your bags, whatever it might be, and they deliver your stuff. Already being used by a company in the UK called Just Eat. Domino's are trialing this thing as well. The goal of this company is to do deliveries, like the last mile delivery, they can go about 3 miles, $1 in 1 hour. What does that do to businesses when you can deliver products to someone's front door for $1 in an hour? So all of these, again, guess what they're going to do? Generate a ton of data so that they all talk to each other and help each other to learn about the physical world and navigate it better. That requires recording lots of data, lots of sensor data, and storing it in a central computer. It's all going to run across your networks. Entertainment and media is changing dramatically, and yes, 8K TV, 4K TV, it's all very exciting. I don't think this is going to happen anytime soon, but we'll eventually get an 8K TV in our homes because they'll be at the price point where, sure, why not? My TV died, I'll buy an 8K one. They take an uncompressed 8K TV stream is about 48 gigabytes per second. Even if you compress it down, it's about 500 megabits a second. Compare that to about 10 megabits a second for an HD stream today. So this will put a strain on the network when it comes. It's not going to come anytime soon, I don't think. But it's something to be watching. What I think is really interesting is this idea of augmented and mixed reality, that you will have digital objects that you summon up in your home. If there's a great video on YouTube. If you haven't seen it, I encourage you to check it out. NFL combined with Microsoft to do a demo of what experiencing football could be like if you had a HoloLens on. So if you haven't seen that, it's an interesting demonstration. This is a still from that. And this idea of volumetric video, the ability to take video, but instead of just taking video from one vantage point, to take a 3D real-time slice of the world so that you can explore that image later. So in the video I showed you earlier, do you remember the one of a child in a mother's arms and the guy looking in like that? That was a piece of volumetric video. And the idea is you would be able to record yourself as a baby and then go back and look at yourself when you're older. Pretty sweet. And if you've seen those action replays on ESPN, ABC, some of the bigger sports channels, where they zoom around the action and zoom in and out, that is volumetric video. They're using lots of high-definition video cameras to essentially recreate the physical world as a video game inside the mind of a computer and then run through that. So instead of pixels, you have this idea of voxels. So some of these demos, there's a company called Hype VR that did a demo earlier this year in partnership with Intel. A single frame of this volumetric video in high definition is 3 gigabytes per frame, and they do 60 frames a second. Think about how you're going to handle that in your networks. And people are going to start to use all kinds of new devices. This is the new Google Pixel Buds. These are available in December, I think. For $159, you will have real-time translation of 40 languages in your ear. So if someone talks to you in Spanish or Chinese, you will hear English. And when you speak back, you better hold your phone out, and they will hear you speaking in their language. $159. Now, that doesn't happen on the phone. That is going over the internet. It's going to be using your networks. Getting the theme here. And an artist called Imogen Heap is looking to, her music is widely sampled, and she's looking to use blockchain as a way to secure the rights for music. So this is another way that technology is going to be used in the music industry. Retail. Okay, we're doing well. Retail, this is a store in China with no employees. It knows who you are when you go in. You give a code. It knows your phone is there. It figures out what objects you took, and then it bills you automatically. Again, all using data. Similar approach used by Amazon in their Amazon Go test stores. This is just the beginning, folks. The idea that you'll just be able to go in, grab what you want, and walk out, no checkout, all of that's handled by sensors and the gathering of data. I want to give you an example. I talked before about business process augmentation. I didn't really explain what it was, so I was saving it until this point. I want to give you an example of a real example of a business and a usage model in a business. This is when you go to a retail store to try on clothes. And you go to the changing room, and what happens is you go to the changing room and you hand your clothes to the assistant, and he or she says, can I show you to your room? And they hang them up for you, and then you go in and you try them on. Now, the reason that the assistant does that is they're quickly eyeballing your clothing to figure out your rough size, the colors you have, the style, and it's their job to try and sell you up, to run back into the store and find things that will match and make a perfect outfit for you. Now, to do that, you can do that with a human, or you can do it with help from algorithms. So in this case, I have my fitting room, I have my clothes, I have a phone that I probably got with me when I go in there. From that, I can sense the RFID tags on the garments. I can sniff the MAC address of the phone, so I might be able to figure out if it's you or not. If you've signed up for the store's application on your phone, they'll know who you are. So I can figure out a purchase history, which comes from the point-of-sale system. I can then put all of that into an analytics engine and figure out what have you taken in the changing room, what's the style of clothes you've bought before, and with a lookup and a go with catalog, it's called in the industry, you can create a pick list for the sales assistant. These are the things you should go and grab from the store. And by the way, I'll just check store inventory to make sure we have them in stock. You can go even further, look at the planogram of the store and figure out a map for the most efficient way to go and grab those objects off the floor. You then bring them back and you hand them to your customer and hopefully say, I think these will go well with what you've got. Sell up. What you've done is take away from the human all of the ability to do all of that stylist stuff, right? To be able to say, well, that goes well with that. And you've put that in the hands of your store designer. So you've still got the human working the system, but they're helped out by an algorithm. Doing that requires all manner of sensing, all manner of access to data. All of this is going to put a strain on your network. Walmart gathers a ton of data. They have 700 data scientists working at Walmart. They figured out some crazy stuff. They know that if the weather is less than 80 Fahrenheit in the summer, there's a light breeze, has to be a light breeze, people are more likely to come in and be looking for berries. They know this because they've analyzed all the data of all of their sales out and all the sensors by looking at what are the conditions outside, and they know that that happens. So they put the berries at the front of the store, and when they do that, in retail, if you can increase sales on an object or an item by 5%, you're a hero. It's amazing. 5% uplift is incredible. They get a 300% uplift when that happens. Similarly, they know the weather conditions for when people are looking for burgers and when they're looking for steaks. They put those, they advertise them in the newspapers the few days before they know these weather conditions are coming, they get an uplift in sales. Gathering data, analyzing data matters. This is why these companies are going to gather so much data and share it between their locations. This is a robot in retail. This helps with figuring out what stock's on the shelf. This woman seems a little bit too delighted that the robot is there to replace her, but whatever. So hopefully that's given you a feel for, I just gave you a few sectors, but these technologies are going to transform how these businesses operate. And in almost every case, they're going to generate massive streams of data and consume massive amounts of data. So how is this all going to play out? What it means is every business is becoming a data business. If they don't pivot to data, they will not be competitive. What do you see here? A cloud. A shark, thank you. No, it's a cloud, but thank you, it was good. What do you see here? A face, yeah. No, it's a cloud. But you cannot help but see the shark and the face. It's because we're not perfect. We're designed to look for the tiger behind the bush that's going to jump out and kill us. Our brains are optimized for safety. And so we have these cognitive illusions, these hidden biases. We are irrational creatures, which means in a business context, we don't always make the best decisions. I can prove it to you. Even if you know you have a bias, you cannot unsee it. You seen this optical illusion before? If you haven't, I mean, these lines are straight, but you cannot help but see them as crooked because you are suffering from an optical illusion. Your brain just sees it that way. Algorithms can be programmed to not have cognitive illusions. They will often make better, more accurate decisions than a human will. And so in a lot of industries, what we're seeing is a move towards the end of the gut. There are a lot of people who've been employed for a long time because they had a good gut. The fashion designer at a retail company that picks next season's colors. You've seen how much stuff goes on discount. If they're right 50% of the time, they are heroes, really, in that industry. Algorithms will do a lot better job. And so we're moving to a world where we're going to be working alongside non-humans, where those non-humans will be algorithms and robots that help us to get over our biases, that help us get over our other weaknesses. So we're going to see an era where we're building these partnerships, and as we look at a business process with different tasks, the trick of leaders will be to figure out how to separate these tasks between what's better done by an algorithm, what's better done by a human, and what's better done by a robot. Because each of these constituents has different strengths. And so it's not, the task of a good leader now is not to figure out how do I replace the humans in my system and save my shareholders money. That's a really short-sighted way of looking at it. The question is, how do I amplify and nurture the abilities of my humans by working them alongside and in teams with algorithms and robots? And to do all of that, you have to be able to sense business events. You have to know when something happened in the physical world. This is why we're moving to a world of 100 trillion sensors. Simple example here. I got a nice pint of beer here in the background photograph. We've all been in a restaurant where we're waiting. We've got some suds left, and the server's not seeming to pay attention or is distracted somewhere else, and we really want them to come over and check in on us. If you had a 3D camera above the top of your table that could look at the level of your beer in your glass and sense that and trigger the event, Steve's going dry on table 3, and just alert the sensor on their watch and just say, swing by table 3, you're accelerating that business process. You're making the customer happier. You're increasing their chances of coming back another time, just with a simple sensor. So huge amounts of data that is going to be created that will be traveling across your networks. And we're moving to a world where people expect customization of product and personalization of service. Difference between the two, customization is Starbucks. I want a mocha latte with sprinkles and blah, blah, blah. You say what you want. Personalization is Netflix recommendations, where they figure out from data what you might want. So personalization requires the gathering of huge amounts of data about your customers' performance, your customers' behavior, so that you can better anticipate their needs. Again, huge amounts of data. And finally, people make money by moving from selling goods to services to experiences to transformations. You make exponentially more money as you move along this curve. It's a standard sort of business way of looking at things. And by doing that, you just need to gather more and more data as you go up that step. Yeah. So I'm going to skip past this one because I just got the times up. So all data and gathering of data and sharing of data between companies is going to become mission critical because that will be required to be competitive in the business. So to wrap it up, we're there. Chris is like, is he ever going to stop? So we're going to see this Cambrian explosion of digital endpoints, where there are lots of endpoints that are gathering and spewing out data. We're going to see automation coming like you wouldn't believe. The robot revolution is coming. They're all going to talk to each other and gather and distribute huge amounts of data. Every company is going to become a mission-critical data company. Data will be at the core of what they do, because they're going to make every decision with data if they can. And if they do that, they're going to be more competitive than the people they're up against. Blockchain is going to gather more data and move things into the digital world. And this idea of natural computing, where you are using augmented virtual reality, is going to create huge amounts of data as we stream VR, AR, and MR. So huge new breakthroughs coming. Get ready for a ton of demand. That's where it's all coming from. Thank you for your time. I hope you enjoyed it.
So here's what I got from that whole presentation. We are imperfect humans suffering from cognitive illusions who will be in the very near future flying Jetsons-type cars with flamethrowers. Did that sum it up? Thank you. That was awesome. Thanks. So how many folks here are actually who are service providers? Okay. Because I know we have a lot of just interested parties here, but if you're a service provider like I am, and you're not weak-kneed after hearing, what was it, 50 gigabytes of data for an 8K stream? I don't even know how to scale for that with my network. So now I've got more work to do. Thank you, Steve. That was awesome. Really. And he is going to be here on the next panel, so you're going to have an opportunity to ask questions. So if you have a question, hold on to that for Steve, because he's going to be around. We do have one brief change to our schedule, so don't get up and go get coffee yet. We're going to take a break after this next brief interlude, but we have one of our awards that normally would be given at the awards luncheon. Our recipient is bailing on us because we're not as important as their next meeting. I'm just kidding. And so we're going to take a brief pause because we do want to recognize this person in person while they're here before they leave. And so I'm going to, without any further ado, turn over this podium and this microphone to John Irwin and Dr. Edward Parker. So Ed, if you and John would like to come up, the floor is, you want this in the podium or? Okay, here. There we go.
Lens cap is on. Make sure it's turned on. The little foam thing was off center there. It was kind of weird. I'm sort of an OCD kind of guy. What a great pleasure it is here to be at this conference and to see you all. I missed it last year, but it's great to be back and see your warm and smiling faces. Put it in my mouth? Okay. That foam thing kind of gets in the way. Anyway, for some years now in the Rogue Valley, I've had the privilege of watching a young man become a not so young man and deliver outstanding contributions to our community and to the community of telecom and technology and all that goes along with that. He's a local hero down in the Deep South, and I have really watched with great amazement at all he's been able to contribute. It's a he, so I gave that away. But he is running away, so we had the opportunity to capture him here. And I'd like to have Jim Teese come forward to receive the Ed Parker Enduring Achievement Award.
Jim Teese embodies the essence of the Edwin B. Parker Enduring Achievement Recognition. Jim is a force of nature for all facets of information technology in Southern Oregon and indeed throughout the country and even overseas. He has been instrumental in advancing broadband and wireless development efforts wherever he goes. He is a well-known community and technology leader beyond Southern Oregon. He brings a strong sense of humor and passion to his efforts. Jim's credo is, whatever you do, do with integrity. Wherever you go, go as a leader. Whomever you serve, serve with caring. Whenever you dream, dream with your all, and never ever give up. Jim is the president and CEO of Project A global commerce digital agency and software developer, founded with his wife in 1990. Current media clients include the City of Ashland, Ashland Chamber of Commerce, City of Medford, McMenamins, Doc Martens, and over 600 more. Jim is also president and CEO of Ashland HomeNet, Ashland's largest internet service provider, cable TV and phone company with thousands of happy customers. Jim is an innovator. He has a best-selling app in the App Store, Art Authority, and has created community services such as Today in Ashland, at localhero.net, and others. Jim is very active in the community. He currently serves on the Jackson County Fair and Expo Board, President, Southern Oregon University Foundation Board, People's Bank Board, and the Northwest Telecommunications Association Board. Past boards include Ashland Chamber of Commerce, he's past president, Ashland Independent Film Festival, Asante Foundation, and the Software Association of Oregon. Jim and his wife Dina run all the businesses together and have 2 young adult children in college. They live on a ranch in Ashland with chickens, goats, horses, and other sorted animals, and high-speed internet. Congratulations, Jim.
Excellent.
Well, thank you very much. I do apologize for bailing, but I have another board that I'm the chair of, and I'm running a board meeting tonight, and then I'm doing a public forum. And so it's not that they're more important than you, but I would get in trouble for not being there. In my 40s, I received a similar award from our community, and as I got up on stage, the only thing that I can think of to say when it's a Lifetime Achievement Award is, I thought that was just for old people that are done. And I wasn't done yet. And my wife, afterwards, she was there, and the mayor came up. The mayor came up and said, "Wow, Dina, you must be so proud of Jim." And you know, if you know my wife, she has a certain look that she gives, and she said to the mayor, "Does he take the garbage out?" That's when I'll be proud of him. And I knew it was going to be awkward because the mayor took a step back, you know, and it was like, oh, okay. And then here I am now in my 50s, and I'm receiving this, and you know, to be named after you and everything that you've done, and to think of the other people that have received this, I don't deserve it, but thank you very much. And when I get home, I'm going to show it to my wife after I take the garbage out. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. Okay, folks, you can now break for the coffee and for the little room downstairs and whatever else you have to do, but drag your sorry butts back here as soon as possible because we're on a tight schedule.
brother.
Frank, I'm Jeremy. We knew each other from your past life.
I was asking you to round them up because they're moving slow, and you're the man. You can do it. Give them 30 seconds.
All righty. I'm good at that. Right. I have a teacher's voice as well. Good morning. Let's try that again. Good morning.
Good morning.
This is what we do in education. We make sure we have a connection. I'd like to thank our distinguished panel members for donating their time and wisdom this morning. That was a enlightening keynote this morning. Thank you, Steve. Lots of questions there. So let's just get started. The bios of our panelists are in your packets. We're not going to go through introductions. We're just going to jump right in. I was talking briefly with Monica right before we started this, and as a library director for a community college in a rural district, we have a 10,000 square foot service area. More than half of our population is rural. The big concern about the futurist viewpoints and technology is that there's still a lot of us not getting it effectively. And so I'd like to bring that futurist discussion that we just had down into more of a sense of everyday reality. And maybe we should start with that. And Monica, will there always be an urban-rural digital divide? Sound? Here we go.
In today's environment, yes, it has continued to be a... Okay, oh, you do have to suck on it. Yes, in today's environment, there is still going to be a distinction between urban and rural. And part of what you and I were chatting about, I am now with the California Telehealth Network, which was a recent acquisition from Ocean in May. And so I've kind of gone down to help them oceanize the California Telehealth Network. What has surprised me is that you look at California as being such a on top of and ahead of time, but I am finding the sad reality that services, just basic IT services, are not being provided in most of the rural communities. We still are dealing with a boatload of T1s. We cannot get services into a lot of those communities that are outside your urban footprint. That's one thing that we will be working on over the course of the next few years is trying to utilize the FCC and state funds to bring those basic services, broadband services, into those rural communities to service those community health clinics and critical access hospitals who are not getting those services today. So yes, it's great to see what the future lies and what the future will bring to those urban communities, but unfortunately we have still a huge territory of rural communities that need basic services.
Wait.
So the one thing I wanted to highlight, though, we tend to look at the digital divide and the haves and the have-nots, but one thing we tend to look over is the fact that we're creating haves and have-nots even within urban areas. So where we may be shooting for 25.3, it may be gigabit next door, right? And so we're creating these gaps within communities that we need to be hyper aware of and make sure that we're ubiquitously providing to the extent that we can and not creating environments where both business and competition won't move in and service an entire region.
Yeah, and I think it's going to take a really strong public-private relationship. So, you know, my last job, so I currently work at CenturyLink running access and wireless and trying to solve this because I have to not only serve my customers, I got to serve my shareholders, and it is phenomenally cost challenging. And my job before this, I lived overseas in Asia and Europe, and there's much more support, right? So for instance, in Switzerland, the last mile is provided by the government, and then the service providers go into there, and that's why there's a lot of fiber. You know, same in China. So I think we need to do a little bit better job as a partnership.
Right.
I'd like to make one more point. Wade, firstly, I want to sort of commend you for making the urban point as well, because you know, I think there is a lot of talk about, am I talking close enough to this? Okay. I think there is a lot of discussion around you know, the urban-rural divide, which certainly there is, and a lot of that, of course, has to do with infrastructure limitations and getting to those hard-to-reach places, although I'm sure we'll talk more about new technologies to do that. But there really are certain issues in urban areas, and I'd like to just sort of add, in addition to the infrastructure limitations, we also need to talk a lot about both device access and education, which are pretty severe limitations, whether it's an urban area or a rural area.
And sorry, could you just extract a little bit more on the education part of that?
Well, you know, I think you can have symmetrical, you know, high-speed internet access, but if you don't have the education or the device paired with that broadband access, that access is pretty superfluous, I would think.
Right.
I think there will be this urban-rural divide for a long time to come, and I think it just comes down to economics too. We are moving so fast in how much bandwidth we consume. I mean, just look at what Steve was just talking about here in the next couple of years. Right. By the time a company, private, public, doesn't matter, it starts to roll something up, it's almost obsolete. It's almost not enough bandwidth by the time they're rolling it out, and they have to turn around and roll it out again in a different type of technology. So where do companies go? They go where the masses are, right? The masses are, you know, where high density is. And so then you got this rural area, even just right outside metro areas that don't seem to be ever being taken care of because it costs so much more money to get from point A to point B, and it may not be something they can get to with wireless or because of the terrain or those type of things. And so those people there, students and people looking for jobs or any type of thing that we were talking about here the last hour is just not available to them because the economics keeps on saying let's push it into the bigger metropolitan areas, and it never has time to actually get down to those rural areas.
Sorry, I'll make it quick.
That's okay.
So there is a unique opportunity going on right now with CAF2. So for instance, we've been funded by the federal government as partners to serve 33 states and 1.6 million underserved or unserved constituents. And there is a magic opportunity right now that there is a confluence of technology. So I'm not going to get into geek talk, but some of the pre-5G stuff in wireless is actually a game changer on cost and performance. And you don't always just have to do wireless. There's a giant quiver of tools you can use from a hybrid scenario to maybe use some wired and some unwired to try to break the cost economics. So that's my primary focus, and actually I have pretty good hope there.
One point I'll make that might be not really thought of is the most expensive place to construct fiber from a deployment point of view is actually downtown Portland. And I do a lot of infrastructure development, costing, and deployment of fiber around the state, and the rural areas, the small towns, often are the least expensive place. They've got aerial infrastructure, the permitting is often the most welcoming, and so I think it's largely about the middle mile connectivity, and a lot of those towns actually have fiber, but the access to those systems are not open. So, you know, it's difficult to attract competition to get into those communities, and then once you're there, the communities are so small that the aggregate demand in those communities doesn't necessarily make a business case. So often it's regions coming together to aggregate that demand, But purely, when we talk economics, the physical deployment of the infrastructure itself is actually quite a bit less costly. And when I compare the least expensive and the most expensive, we're talking about 100-fold difference in cost.
Well, I'm from Colorado, and I live in a small mountain town, so I would beg to differ because when you start trying to bore through rock, it becomes a very expensive endeavor, and sometimes more. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I was just saying that I live in a small mountain town, Colorado, and if you deploy on the western slope there, and you have these similar issues here, I'm assuming, that it becomes very expensive in rural areas to bore for fiber. It can be very costly. And it costs a lot more than it does in bigger cities.
So is there a cost-effective solution on the horizon in the next 5 to 7 years that will make the infrastructure more accessible, rural or urban?
Yeah, it's really a toolkit issue. So you got to have a whole bunch of tools. You got to look at it market by market. So I want to stay out of geek stuff, but there is some cool stuff there. Like, for instance, millimeter wave. Millimeter wave will hit line of sight in multiple gigs to about 300 to 500 meters. So that's one choice for the last mile to bring a gig. Then if you can also do microwave hops, right, to your last mile and decide to use a native copper plant or the microwave hops, because just like you said, digging through Colorado, which we have projects in Colorado, I'm seeing costs in the multiple tens of thousands of dollars per mile. Now, if I'm hitting 16 households and I have to go 20 miles, that's not going to pay, right? So I need microwave backhaul. So, and also, if you look at the CBRS spectrum, the Citizen Broadband Radio Service spectrum that the government has released, combine that with 5G technologies, you now have a matter to get multiple tens of megabits starting to get at a reasonable cost. So to answer your question shortly, there are tools now and resources we have that didn't exist, even going back about 5 years.
And is there a role for government in that?
Well, government can do things like release spectrum, right? So spectrum is the biggest challenge. You don't need 10 or 20 megahertz, you need hundreds of megahertz, right? There are swaths of spectrum, honestly, that nobody's using. Just release it for rural broadband initiatives. That's a big play. Number two, continue subsidizing to make sure that there is a business model, right? Because I have, stockholders, right? I mean, I do have to show some profit here when I build this stuff. So that's why it's a public-private partnership.
Just to piggyback on that, I think the government plays a huge role in this. I mean, ultimately, new solutions are only as cost-effective as, in part, we say they are, that the market allows. And I would argue that that comes a lot down to providing the right incentive structures. And perhaps to sort of provide maybe a CUB specific. I work for Citizens Utility Board, and a lot of our work is in energy. I'm sure many folks are familiar with the residential energy tax credit, which recently expired, which is problematic in some ways. But I think it's a good and useful example in that it was initiated at a time where the solar market could not stand on its own 2 feet. And in part, the RETC expired this past year, or we chose not to reinvigorate it, because the solar market can now stand on its own 2 feet. I don't know if I could get into deep specifics about the right incentive structures to put in place, but the state government does play a huge role in that, and so do local jurisdictions as well.
I think the government has a big role in being able to help in this way. And one of the things that most of you guys are service providers. I saw your hands get raised there. I have multiple hats, backgrounds, and one of them is with the city of Sandy. So I come from a little bit of a government background there. But and that is there's permitting, and permitting is needed. It's good. But what I think can happen is something we learned at. Got to talk with Milo Medin with Google, and you might have heard him say this, is when they were picking the first Google site, one of the things was they wanted a dedicated person there in Kansas City that was there just for permitting. because the answer wasn't whether it was yes or no, it was how fast they could get back an answer so they can move forward, change direction. And so I think there's a lot of slowdown that happens in government because it's the bureaucracy and, hey, we can just wait 60 days because that says we can wait 60 days. Well, but if you know in a day if it was going to be yes or no or change or help out, that time, which helps save corporations money because of time, and also the deployment of things can be very helpful. So we've taken that back to the city of Sandy and just not taken that idea just in the telecommunications world, but also in planning and other aspects throughout the city. There doesn't need to be just wait because you can wait.
Okay, so let's pivot and take this to this question. What are likely to be the driver applications for broadband networks in the future? Is it Internet of Things, high def, VR? Steve brought what would be the very quick, far future will be very near, but what's going to be the next thing that you all are concentrating on to push your innovations? Go ahead, Frank.
Well, I still think there's a lot of pressure tied to over-the-top streaming video, right? So, traditional linear video is going away. We just launched a, pure streaming product. So does everybody else. The demand's going up. 8K is about 50 megabits a second. That's a lot of bloody bandwidth that you can't get a good return on, right? So there's not a direct correlation with what you bill and what people use. But I also think it's market by market, right? IoT will be a huge demand, right? Especially once we catch up with what Germany and China is doing with Industry 4.0. But that's more of a regional demand. But if I just look at it just for pure bandwidth utilization, I think we have some leadway in the urban areas that there's enough for a business model to support this video pressure. I'm still more concerned about the rest of the constituency and literally concerned about heading to more suburban to urban. Because our average bandwidth that we have in the US, are we in the 20s or 30s in the world? I mean, it's bloody embarrassing what we have here, right? So we have to lift all boats, and that's going to be the big driver, find a way to do that. Get us back on board, get us back on board to being innovative. I mean, Britain's got OpenReach, for heaven's sake. I can go to, some random town in Scotland, near Inverness and get 100 meg service for, 40 quid. So we need something similar.
So that brings up the question: are we staying competitive with Europe and Asia, and what can we do to catch up?
Once again, it's going to take a public-private partnership, and I think it's a very complex mix. But we have to work together to, bring down those barriers. And thanks for bringing up permitting. I forgot how painful permitting is, right?
Ready.
Yeah, right. But I think, there's many mixes. I think the technology is already ahead enough of the curve for cost compression, right? So when you're doing fiber, it's really labor, right? Once you get over using aerial. So there's a lot of work to do. I just think we need to use every option we have in the quiver. Wireless is a big savior, though, right? If you don't have to do the last mile, the answer for wireless is more spectrum. CBRS is about 150 megahertz. That's not enough. There needs to be another giant swath of spectrum in the last mile to help get that last, 8 miles where those people can get 50 to 100 megabits.
Well, if I can kind of go back to the prior question that was asked related to what's the demand right now, and then kind of dovetail that into what you're talking about. I think the fundamental problem is there's two things. One is there's demand and consumption, and a lot of that's driven, at least in the ISP space, by entertainment and over the top, right? But the second fundamental problem is that we're seeing a really strong growth in the analytics side, and whether that's the changing the color of the indicator on the rain or on the umbrella, or other data-driven push analytics, whether or not that's advertising, which consumes a tremendous amount of bandwidth in terms of just pushing content that customers may not even want to use at that time. But there's a lot of that starting to build into the network environment. And the second is how we use the spectrum, right? So in the cable environment, a lot of operators are still running traditional analog or digital video. That's the wrong way to use the spectrum if we're trying to deliver broadband. On wireline, it's the same thing. We have a variety of technologies that are available to us now, and it's how do you make the best use of that copper pair, and even in the fiber environment, are we maximizing the fiber assets that we have in our communities and our environment so that we can deliver the demand? And that stuff takes a lot of time, right, in order to drive the technology. And I think we're all taking different approaches on it, whether or not it's wireless or it's wireline, but hitting that early so that we're not caught off guard. I think we're in a phase right now where a lot of the service providers have caught up with demand, and it's about maintenance now. We've got to stay ahead of it, and we're seeing still 40% CAGR in terms of demand. And so we've got to grow faster than that going forward.
So I would say that one of the things that I think we'll see more of is, and this is really a question of control, in my humble opinion. If the government wants to have more control over their sustainable vision for their community going forward, I think it's in their best interest, and I know this will upset some people up here, but it's in their best interest to own the asset, right? Because today they don't own the asset, but services are being provided by other providers. You have to kind of ask permission to do stuff. So it sort of shuts the door on your ability to be agile and proactive and puts you in a mode where you're reactive as a community. And so I really think control is more of a strategy and not a tactical response. And so I'd like to see more municipalities actually own their assets. Not necessarily provide services on the last mile, but have those assets that they own and control within the community itself.
And by that you mean you would be giving up what, control of that? You wouldn't be giving up control of it.
No. So a community would own the infrastructure, right, but would not be providing last mile services.
Right. Okay.
So an example that I like to talk about is Ammon, Idaho is an example where the city owns infrastructure up to the premise, but provides no service inside that premise.
Interesting.
And getting back to the rural communities where we're finding that facilities is lagging and that the vendors are citing that it's too expensive to expand those facilities. So we're not being able to provide the bandwidth that we need in those rural communities. So that is part of the problems that we're encountering in trying to develop out those rural communities. And again, I bring it down to trying to save lives. I'm in the telemedicine market and trying to be able to provide urban services out to those rural communities, whereas most of those folks don't have MDs. They're either a nurse practitioner or a nurse who's providing those services, and those telemedicine abilities to be able to consult into those urban sites is life-saving. And so needing that bandwidth out to be able to do that. Sorry, I don't think I would do a telemed consult over wireless, but because certainly the weather can hinder some of that activity. But if it can get better, so be it. But we do need a means of being able to help these communities that are not being serviced today. And I do have to say that the vendors that Ocean has worked with over these many years has been a delight, and we thank you for the investments that you've made out there with us in providing those services. So now I'm looking for folks that can help us out down in California to do the same.
Yeah, and once again, public and private. So I've been on the other side too, right? Not on the service provider side. I've had a CLEC, and I had the fortunate opportunity to work with Wade for about 7 years at Ben Broadband. So an example at Ben Broadband is when we worked with Prineville in exchange for a franchise. We provided fiber connectivity to the schools and other public resources. So my advice is just to be wise, right? I mean, I don't mean to downplay Burns, but when Burns had the redundant backup for the lottery go through Burns, lo and behold, they discovered there was no off-ramp to the infrastructure, right? Just my advice, once again, is negotiate hard and when folks come to your community. So hopefully I don't get in trouble for that statement, but that's how I feel about it.
And the Dalles did the same thing with Google. They provided optics downtown, and it's been a good partnership. So this brings up the question when you think about this all-encompassing technology, how is this going to affect everybody as far as social work, school work, education? interpersonal communication. Will we ever be able to once again unplug? Is it worth it? Let's go to a philosophical level. Can you do that? I was struck when Steve said that my washing machine would be able to tell me stuff. I'm gonna have a grumpy washing machine. He's gonna say, "You put silk in me again," and I'm not gonna like that. But I think there's a need to disconnect at times. But maybe if there are any thoughts from the panel on that, can you be too invasive?
I think it's pretty clear that you can be. Walking around downtown Portland, you see everybody staring at their phone, almost getting run over. I do think it's clear that the technology is a utility. It can be used for many different things. But it's up to us how we adopt it, how we use it, how we benefit from it. And I think it's personal decisions around when to disconnect, when that's appropriate. And there certainly is that addictive element to immediate gratification, and I think that's an experience we all have.
So,
Steve?
At the turn of the last century, we all connected to something called electricity. And we don't tend to want to disconnect from that because it's become so intertwined with our lives and our ability to live. We wouldn't be able to have this meeting in here because it's so dark outside without these lights. I suppose we could have gas lamps if we wanted to. We should just have another fire in the gorge then. So that's not a good idea. So electricity has been good, and we figured out how to incorporate it in our lives in ways where it's positive. And I think with data, that's another resource that's coming into our lives. It's the same way we can switch on a switch and electricity flows into our lights. We have data that flows into our lives. And it also flows out of us as well. We have this data exhaust. What it requires is a cultural conversation to decide how we want to incorporate all of this data into our lives. And there's a privacy question there, there's a security question that's related to that, but it's really a cultural question of how do we want to incorporate technology. Because fundamentally, technology and culture have had this interplay for decades. In the 60s, we had this conversation about, well, this thing called the TV that we now have in our houses, are we the kind of family that has the TV on when we have a meal together, or is the TV off?
Right.
And then when we got cell phones, we had the conversation about, are we the kind of am I the kind of person that has my cell phone out when I'm at dinner with friends, or do I keep it in my pocket and keep it switched off? And so there's always these cultural conversations, and that's what I want to try and start simulating today. So as a futurist, I think about all this stuff all the time. I now deputize you all as futurists. Go have these conversations, because that's fundamentally what it comes down to is, where do we want data in our lives? Where do we not want data? When do we want free products, free services in return for being the product? Think about Facebook. You are the product. Have that conversation with your friends and family, because if we don't, it will just happen to us, and suddenly we'll have data where we don't want it. We'll be giving up data to people we don't want to. So we have to be mindful. So I deputize you all.
I'm going to see if I can sort of combine a few thoughts, and hopefully they're mostly cogent. So I think going back to your initial question, do we have any capacity to unplug? And I guess I would say probably no. And perhaps that's an okay thing. And here's why I think from CUP's perspective it's an okay thing. And it's probably sort of the unique perspective that I can bring to this panel as being probably the least technical person here. And that's, I think we look at driving data and sort of information communication technologies in general as a means to solve probably the biggest existential problem that we have in the world. And that problem, frankly, is climate change. And as a consumer advocate who sort of lives in this energy world, or at least a world that is coming closer and closer together with telecom and energy, we see ICTs and certainly broadband applications as an arrow in the quiver to solve that problem. And Steve, you talked a lot about electric vehicles, electric autonomous vehicles, and certainly there's a way to utilize EVs to sort of levelize the grid and bring on more flexible renewable resources. So I really do think that broadband applications play a major, major role in not only allowing utilities to do smart things, but allowing consumers to sort of feel empowered and take control over their resource decisions. Which one am I going?
The ability to, I think, fully disconnect is kind of gone now. There's a different way of looking at it, though, and I guess I think of my kids. I have 3 kids, and they're 10, 8, and 6. They don't know a world without the internet or being connected. But their connection, what they think of connectivity is screen time. And so we do something in our house. We try to limit their screen time because they're young, impressionable minds that need to be doing Legos or doing other things, right, to help build those skills. But I was thinking about this, you know, there are a lot of other ways we are connected that they don't even know about. For instance, every time our door opens, you know, I get an alert on my phone or my watch. I go running, and when I'm done, my watch tells me how far I went and what my heart rate was and all these things. It's automatically uploaded to the internet, the cloud, and you know, we go forward. And there's days when I can't get connected and I want to wait before I go on my run because, well, I want that data. And so there's those type of connectivity things that we are starting to integrate into our lives that we don't not want to have. It's not just, are we watching Netflix? Are we surfing YouTube? Are we playing Minecraft? Or whatever these kids want. The other thing is I work for an ESD. We're seeing our bandwidth double every 18 months. And that's been historical for quite a while now. And one of these things is that when we're seeing a lot more BYOD devices. But then we're also turning around and saying, we're not giving books to students anymore. It's going to be all online. So we have this problem. My wife and
As a librarian, that's not true.
my wife and I have this discussion going with our son. Well, he needs to do his homework. Well, he doesn't have any more screen time. Well, he needs to do his homework, but he doesn't have any more screen time. So where do we try to do that, fit that in as a parent, is we're going, yeah, we'd like to disconnect our kids away from this, but we're running into a problem that we can't. And so schools are going away from having books and having Chromebooks, which are having to be online all the time. And then, so you see how that just starts to snowball down.
So a little bit of history. So I had an email address in 1980 down at USC, right, one of the first sites on ARPANET. And I'm just going to run through history because history repeats itself. So what I saw in the late 80s, a bunch of universities got together. We wrote these multi-user dungeons. I know it sounds stupid, but you basically give a magic wand to people, and people did it back then, and they created these giant mega universes. Well, to tell you the truth, for me, it was just a programming exercise, but it shocked me because people had little sub chat rooms and had all these adventures. The way I dealt with it is I wrote a robot, right? So it was an early cognition robot. I let it roam around. It said it was me. I would just whistle, and it would come to me and say, dude, who did you see today? Draw me a map of the universe, or whatever, right? I think this applies to today. So I talked to my kids, and I said, hey, guys, I'm going to become a Luddite, right? My aim, and I think the goal of future generations, it becomes a privilege not to be connected. People will pay for that privilege, right, to be left alone from, to have more quality in your life. So how do you do this? Same thing. With AI, there's wonderful open source text recognition libraries. I told my kids, I said, I'm going to do two things. I have an SMS gateway. I have APIs into Facebook. The next year, I'm going to write something, and it's going to start to not be me. And as I get older and I separate, you can talk to it. It'll act like me, talk like me. It'll share memories with you. I'll share pictures with you that you've never seen before. And when I pass away, I'll still share stuff. But I'm going to be fishing, right? So I think, so at the end of the day, you have to ask what this added for quality of life. I'm still looking for it. I'm really not into pictures of cats, right? So there has to be, there is a dynamic currency of value, but technology always leads ahead of ethics and morals. So I think we'll get a handle on it, but I still think the rich person of the future is not going to want to be bothered 24/7 and have their reality augmented. So there you go. My personal opinion, but I'm still a human.
So Frank, next year, that Frank will be on the panel?
Yes, sir? Yeah, next year, it'll be me, I promise.
So that brings up the question that Steve was talking about a lot. that this is all predicated on data and data collection and data gathering. The robots on the sidewalk, the flying cars, air traffic control, all that data. And as somebody mentioned, we are the product of Facebook. Everybody, I think, realizes now. So where does the privacy issue come up? Where does the cybersecurity issue come up? Where is that line draw? Where is that concern manifested in all this technology and all this data that I want my groceries delivered to the front door, and I want my robot to know that I want carrots today. So that's rather innocuous, but there's also much more important implications in that data collection.
I'm going to go back to what I said around there's a role for state government to play. And this is directly in regard to the privacy question. And that is CUB, frankly, advocates for a state policy around digital privacy, especially sensitive personal information. As I'm sure most folks know, there would have been some pretty basic privacy regs that would have gone into effect this coming December, but through some careful means in Congress, there was a rigmarole there, and those rules were revoked. And what you saw very quickly thereafter was, I think, in the neighborhood of 25 or 30 states proposed bills in their local state houses to combat the issue on their own. And Oregon is one of those states. And frankly, from CUB's perspective, from my personal perspective, as someone who does not want my sensitive personal information shared, I think that's a really good thing. And I think we as a state should strive to put in place some common sense regulations that protect folks and protect their sensitive personal information. And I think if we do that, you can see kind of a patchwork policy effect. There was a bill in California that looked like it was going to pass. I can't remember the assembly bill number. And you know, at the late hour, the providers came in and the Internet Association came in and certainly squashed that effort. But I think what we're going to see is continued efforts in Oregon and certainly continued efforts in other states around privacy.
So to me, the central question is, who owns your data? Do you own your data, or do you outsource that to somebody else? And at the moment, your data is stored by other people because you don't really have a way to store your own data, whether that's financial information, health information, other personal information. And so we've outsourced it. And partly we did it because somebody held up something shiny and we gave away our information for free. Blockchain is a really interesting potential pivot for that. It potentially opens the door to somebody to create a data commons platform which is secure and distributed and not owned by anybody, where we could store our own personal data and keep it private and lock it up with military-grade security, and then give you the ability to expose that to people that need access to it from a one-time use. So that people aren't aggregating data, you own your own data, and then you can decide to share your genetic information with some cancer research effort if you want, and do it anonymously, if you choose to, or not. Or you want to share your financial information because you're applying for a mortgage, you can do that without it being copied and stored by Equifax, who then expose you to huge amounts of risk. So the model, I think, is open to changing, and blockchain will be the key to that. And probably the next step beyond that will be to get rid of social security numbers, which were created out of the 1930s and are completely open to huge privacy violations. So using blockchain as a way to form a sense of identity and to be able to say who you are and get away from paper passports and documents and social security numbers and stupid stuff like that, which is so open to abuse, is probably the key to beginning to rethink privacy and give us control of our own data.
That's absolutely true. Blockchain has some incredible implications coming in the future, but there is a really big privacy component to that I don't think has been completely fleshed out, but it is a paradigm shift for sure. Anybody else want to?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I wonder if there's any concern about the data that's already out there, even as blockchain evolves. What about all the data that's out there now? I think I was at another conference, and the FTC chairwoman had said that there are 900 million profiles out there in the broker world today across the globe. So, how do you protect something that's already out there, if that makes sense? You know, that information's already there. And I guess the other concern would be, what are we doing about security for IoT devices? You know, what's being done there, and should we have concerns about autonomous vehicles? I think it's cool that we're going to have an autonomous boat, but I wonder, how do they protect those boats from pirates? Maybe Steve knows. They have robots on there to protect them.
I'm going to speak to the healthcare environment, which is heavily regulated with HIPAA and such. And if, for those of you who don't know who OCHIN is, one of the areas that we provide is electronic health records, EPIC and now NextGen. And so we have our own data aggregation tool, which we are constantly downloading from various different sources, internally with our collaboration, but also externally from Social Security and such. Again, the data is used for being able to provide various different clinics with the ability to be able to provide better health care related to someone who has very similar issues and such. So from a healthcare perspective, it is very, very much needed to be able to ingest all of that data to be able to provide that information out to a patient. But granted, there's a lot of information, some personal information that's always stripped of that data before it is ingested. So there are many, many ways that you're able to provide that security and secure that information, that personal information, before it's put out there across the country.
I think one of the things that for this digital security, the private information, the privacy, is we have the technology to secure a lot of that, but it comes back down to the very basics of social engineering. And give you an example, you know, I work in an ESD and work with a lot of schools across the state. We get a lot of emails that are socially engineered from the superintendent with their avatar that looks like they're coming from, you know, the superintendent to the business managers or the accounts payable, you know, that, hey, can you contact me? This happened here last week. Can you contact me? And then they go, oh, wait, sorry, I'm in a meeting right now, but can you open up this? They start having dialogue as soon as they get an email back. And it's this social engineering where they think that they're really talking, not, you know, using electronics or, you know, cracking into things, and then they end up giving away. You hear the stories of everyone's social security number and all their data, financial records, or writing a $3 million check to some vendor they're doing construction with. You know, they go after school districts and other agencies that have bonds because they know that they're doing buildings, and so there's a lot of these checks going out. And so teaching our staffs, teaching people good digital citizenship and what to do and how to react on that is kind of where we need to work in that area, as well as the privacy of the internal storage of the data.
Yeah, it's interesting because once again, you know, technology is ahead of society, and there's like this broad area in the older markets, like in cable that I worked with Wade with. You know, it's all scrubbed, it's non-identifiable data. So the targeted advertising might be into a region. So if they play a Ford commercial, you get a different commercial in this neighborhood versus this commercial. But then you go all the way to the Google and Facebooks of the world. It's targeted to you. I mean, if I do a lookup to buy a pair of glasses, I see these glasses for a month. It appears like in a minute. I'm just like, no, stop it, right? So to me, once, again, at the end of the day, just like Steve said, it's a concept of even who owns your data, number one, but number two, they don't even have to know it's you. They don't care it's you. It's just an amorphous blob. You know, you literally can use AI and, you know, big data. They know your consumer behavior, and sometimes it's quantified like in an Equifax, which is a very lightly regulated industry, right? Every credit card transaction, they sell it back and forth. So there's this giant gray area of regulation and ownership and security, and even what you can control with blockchain, because every digital transaction you make is tied back to you, whether formally or informally.
And it's funny that you bring that up. As a information literacy instructor, I always bring up the filter bubble and how do we get information that isn't directly aligned with our past. So does anybody want to tackle that question? So when Steve mentioned that, you know, the little sidewalk robot's going to come and bring me carrots because it knows I want carrots, but, you know, maybe I just want some serendipity and I want some Brussels sprouts. And, you know, so how do we get that information or that point of view that isn't us? Anybody want to try to tackle that? No? Okay. So we're going to go back to the technology aspect.
Actually, just have a random algorithm and order all kinds of weird stuff.
So order the Brussels sprouts once every month.
Signal the noise, right? You throw all the other stuff away, like the dog food, right? Sorry, and the Kool-Aid.
So when I was at Intel, there were some efforts to build algorithms that didn't just, if it knew you liked coffee shops, when you went traveling, it didn't just say, well, here's a good coffee shop you might enjoy, but to try and create surprise and delight. So to build into those algorithms to say, hey, there's this art gallery that you might enjoy as well. And to derive from the fact that you liked one thing that you may like another. And so to always try and grow you as a human and not take you into the same pathways and the same cycles, but actually to try and help you to find new experiences. So that effort is underway. I don't know the latest status, this is a couple of years ago, but the problem has been identified and there are people working on trying to solve that.
I think it's plays a major cultural, has major cultural impact of how we interact with the world and people who aren't like us. I think that's kind of important. Let's get back down to the technological level. We're all aware here in the Gorge, the New Yorker article from 1.5 years ago, major earthquake, tsunami coming in, wiping out the Oregon coast. So, technology people, what happens when the infrastructure goes down the tubes? What do we use? How do we connect?
Well, I think it's clear that the initial response, wireless is the easiest technology to restore. You know, the existing systems can be constructed in such a way that they are self-healing. So you can suffer a lot of critical damage and still maintain a certain degree of service. So that's more the proactive element to limit the destruction. I think once the destruction's occurred, you're really in a rapid response position where you're aiming for technology like wireless that you're going to be able to immediately bring up. I think the other aspect of the question is then how do you rebuild the infrastructure to better it after the fact? And I do think that creating some better aspects of joint use and not just with respect to the kind of pulled infrastructure, which a lot of us think of as joint use, but common transportation corridors, energy corridors. These are aspects of infrastructure that we don't really tie in with communications, I think, to the degree that we should. And I think if you were going to rebuild a lot of that infrastructure, doing it in synergy with these other elements would make a lot of sense.
And I think, at least for the 7 years I've been working, especially with the Broadband Commission, how well connected throughout Oregon we truly are. And a lot of that has to do with the collaboration that all of you as vendors have done throughout this state, and that we are truly in a much better place than probably a lot of other states because of that involvement and dedication throughout this state that you all have done. So I think you guys need to recognize the work that you have all done throughout this state to be able to recover from any natural disaster that would take place here in Oregon.
to build on Leaf's statement about recovery, I think one of the greatest risks we have is that in a situation like that, we'll be moving really quickly, right? And if we don't have the plans in place before the event to rebuild in the way that we would like to and envision this network, the network of Oregon, to look in a post-disaster environment, or just in an ideal way, we may miss it for a second time. And so I think that's a huge risk that we all need to be thinking about in terms of what should it look like? Do we have the resources? Do we have the plans in place? Do we have the conversations? If we had these common communication corridors, we had all the conduit we need, we had all the right-of-way, all the access, permitting wasn't an issue, and the capital is available, what and how would it look like? And I think along the way, you know, and hopefully we never have the Cascadia event, but along the way to when that event may occur, that we're still building toward that plan. And I don't know that we're there yet, but I think we should be thinking that way.
Another point I'll make about the proactive element is just how much I think single points of failure, critical risk, we still have in the state, and whether or not the planners, whomever that is, that are considering this event, taking the emergency into into the process, is understanding how these networks are all routed. I know that we don't do a good job as an industry in being transparent about where our infrastructure is, how the equipment is set up and configured, and where we interconnect with one another. All of those things play a really key role in how resilient the system is when you have a major break. We are still very reliant on Portland, as a city, as an interconnection point, I think, of all these networks. And even if you focus one network or several networks to have separate exit points, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're still not going to be crippled with a major event in kind of the present hub. So I just think that there's a complicated web of systems there that need to be considered, and it's a difficult information problem to get.
So we're coming down to the end, and I'd like to start at the far end and have everybody answer, how should we as individuals and organizations prepare for the future? What should we be doing now to get to the futurist vision that Steve introduced us to?
Do I have to go first? Just kidding. Well, I'll go back to what I said before. I think if you were here for Steve's great presentation, I think the one thing that scares me is the do we today have the ability to absorb what he was talking about? Do we have the ability to absorb and be flexible enough for what's coming? And I'm not sure that we're there. I'm not even sure we're close to being there. And I'll go back to what I said earlier. I think one of the only ways we're going to get there is through having control of assets. And who has control of those assets is going to have a lot of control over the technology adoption to some degree. I think technology is going to force change in the way that we construct and operate networks. It's going to have to. It will do that. The question is, does that create other digital divides? And I think it will, as we were talking about earlier, for the comparison between rural and urban. But if you don't have the ability to absorb what's coming, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out over the next 5 years.
I guess the one thing I might suggest is to try and remove your preconceived notions of those technologies. And Steve mentioned that that's not really possible, but try to focus on the objective data around those technologies and how they're going to impact us, both for the good and for the bad. I've seen a lot of preconceived notions about new introduction of technology based on what was done before, when in fact it's completely different. It might have the same name, but voice is a good example that I always think of in the old circuit switch world. And then many years later, there was a whole new regime around voice that came about, and it was like just a very different method of delivery, how we used it, and I just think that rethinking, trying to let our biases go as we encounter new technology would be a good start.
You're right, exactly right. It's a cognitive leap, and as Steve was going through his presentation, there were some points where it was like, whoa, okay, wait a minute. But you have to trust yourself and trust what's going on to have that develop.
So fundamentally, we cannot be caught in a defensive posture as we build out networks. I think we have to understand consumer behavior. We have to be more forward-thinking. I don't think 5 years is enough, frankly. I think capacity is going to be a major issue. And we need to be thinking much longer term in terms of how we're building our networks out and not thinking about it in a one-size-fits-all world. I'll be the first person to agree that everybody needs a gig to the home, but I'll say that isn't everywhere, right? That may be a mix of technologies for a mix of use cases. Some people perfectly happy with a 3x1. Others, if you're in an area where you need medical, that's going to be never enough, right? It was interesting, a couple years ago I did a tour of the broadband infrastructure in Iceland, and you talk to people in the rural part of Iceland, and they say, we don't need broadband. But what we need is our payment cards to work. We've got to be able to generate revenue. The economy has to work. And when you talk to the broadband planners in the city, they drew a line around the city. Inside, it's broadband. Outside, it's stimulating and managing the economy. And I think we have to understand those use cases in our environments as well. Where do we want to invest for the future, and where do we want to sustain based on the needs and the use cases there?
Well said. I still remember the refrigerator from last year's conference. That blew me away, but also the thought of, geez, that can make my grocery list for me and actually send that to Safeway and have it delivered. So there's certain aspects of the technology are fascinating, and you certainly want to envision that coming at you quicker. Then you kind of go to the other end of the spectrum where, as I stated before, communities that don't have broadband, that need broadband. And so trying to come to that happy medium and being able to provide services where services are needed, and then, yes, being able to enjoy the technology in the areas that can provide it as well. So as providers of the services out there, continue to look at where you can benefit communities in the best way, and being able to also take care of the upcoming technology of the future.
I think the concern I have is not more in technology, but it's about how are we behind in technology and what that means for our country moving ahead. I think the golden generation of our country was after World War II, where all the vets that came back from World War II with the GI Bill. That momentum has ended. It's over, right? Innovation is not driven from the US anymore. All mobile companies, where all the revenue and the revolution is happening, there's not a single company in the US, right? It's in Europe, it's in China, right? So, and even Germany is restructuring. So Industry 4.0 sounds interesting. It's more than interesting. It is a complete re-engineering of the manufacturing base of Germany to stay the most competitive manufacturing agent in the world, right? We have nothing like this, nothing at all. So where does the US want to be in the value chain? Right now, we're just consumers, right? That's it. We're not producing value anymore. So the challenge I have is, how do we reinvent and provide value, right? I mean, it really has to start today, or we're just not going to be able to catch up. Technology, which we created, we're no longer global leaders in this anymore. Almost anywhere. The only places I think we lead is with Facebook, Apple, and Google. Big deal, right? That doesn't feed people. That doesn't change the world. So let's change the world today, right? We have time to take this back, but it's going to take a literal rebuild initiative of a large proportion.
Absolutely true.
I guess I would say, don't necessarily assume the worst, but also don't assume that technology is going to solve all of the world's ills. And certainly I did at least make an attempt to highlight how I think ICTs and broadband in particular play a really major role in combating climate change or other really big existential problems that we face. But I think if we tend to sort of rest back on that, we no longer have skin in the game. And another point I'd probably make is, in preparation for this panel, again, not being the least technical person up here, I read a couple of white papers yesterday. These are from 2012, 2013, and it's mind-blowing to me, it's astounding to me how quickly things move. So perhaps don't make too many assumptions. I mean, these papers, no one's talking about, low-lying or mid-level satellites to provide, wireless broadband access to hard-to-reach rural areas. No one's talking about that 3 or 4 years ago. So, I think just don't make too many assumptions and keep skin in the game would be my points.
I think from my point of view, what I could say is to all of you, remember that there's going to be a couple things that's always going to be true. And one of those is change. Change will happen. Change will always be happening. And I think there's providers out there, and there's other people that think, well, we've got to a certain point, we'll just sit on that and ride it out, the cash cow kind of effect. And I think those areas are going to be disserviced. You got to remember that there's always going to be change going ahead. I think another thing that you can always rely on is that we're going to consume more bandwidth or produce more bandwidth going forward. It's never going to go backwards or never going to stay the same. And so what does that mean? We're always looking at our networks, and we're doing it at a high speed, constantly, never keeping up. That's how I feel. We're never keeping up on some of those things. Probably the last thing is, I think that we all need to hang out with more Steve Browns. The futurists to scare us to death about what the future is bringing, right? Because we need to be constantly reminded what the future is, because sometimes we just get into our jobs and what we're doing, and we're just trying to solve that problem, and we're not thinking enough ahead to adjust to make sure that we are solving the problems ahead of the game and saving resources or time.
No, that's absolutely true, and I agree with that. It goes right back to what Frank was saying, that we haven't made that leap. We've been left behind. We've been stuck. Steve, last.
So it'd be easy to just say, I triple down on what Frank said. That's a bang on the money. America is not going to be competitive. And as an American citizen, I don't know, I don't have to sound like it, but as an American citizen, I care about that deeply, and that's my biggest fear for the US. But two thoughts I'd share. The first one is, I'm sorry if I scared you. I didn't mean to scare you today. And I know the stuff I talk about can be scary. We often can feel powerless, and it feels like the future is something that happens to us. All right, the future's coming. Get the children inside. My God. The future is actually, it's built by humans. It's built by people. It's built by us. And what I talked about today is not really predictions of the future, but these are the things that are possible. These are the things that people are likely to build. And so we should all participate in that conversation. We should all have a voice in that. That's why I say I deputize you as futurists. Have this conversation. It's important that we do. Second thought is that technologies are going to come at us more and more quickly. Things are accelerating. I talked about, the TV in the 1960s, the cell phone in the sort of 1990s and forward, and we had to have a cultural conversation about how to incorporate that in our lives. It's going to come every month and then every week that we're challenged with something where we have to think, well, how do I incorporate this in my life or not incorporate it in my life? Do I allow my aging parent to be taken care of by a robot, for example? Is it okay to leave the kids at home with a robot? These are the types of questions that we will face. We won't have the luxury of time to really think about each individual problem on its merits. So what I would propose, and this is something I talked about in a TED Talk a few years back, so you can check it out on YouTube. The fundamental question is, does this machine, does this technology help me be a better human or not? And in order to be able to answer that question quickly and efficiently, it means you have to think ahead of time about what does it mean to be a better human? And what does it mean to me? Because it's different for everybody. If you're a father or a mother, or you are a son or a daughter, if you are a co-worker, the context matters. And it matters for everybody differently because we all have slightly different value systems. They mostly overlap, but they don't always. So for me, the advice I would give you to help you navigate the future is, one, to participate in it, participate in the conversation, but also to think about, for you personally, what does it mean to be a better human, to have that down, figure it out, because people don't always take the time to really answer that question. And then as the technology comes at you, it will be so much easier to answer the question, does it get me closer to where I want to be as I grow as a human, or does it take me further away?
Right, exactly. Thank you to the panel. We have a few minutes for questions. We have a microphone here.
Hi, I'm David Olson, and thank you. It was very illuminating. I have a question for Steve Brown and the panel. And that is, when I was involved with regulation of technology, there's always a dark side, of course, to technology. A rule of thumb in the 90s, I'm not sure it changed much in the 2000s, was for wholesome mainstream technology futures, the porn industry was a year ahead, and the terrorists were a year behind. So then there's the big section in the middle you occupy. I'm not sure the bad guys are a year behind anymore. Actually, I'm not commenting on them. It may be concurrent or ahead. So I looked at all the technologies you put up there. They're amazing. And then I think of the dark side of all of them. How can we not in a polarized world? So I wonder at Intel if there's a, if you have a daemon, Lord Steve Vader at Intel, who follows you around and says, well, this is how much damage these can do to all of us. So I wonder if Intel also keeps a Vader. If you're the Obi-Wan, there's a Vader saying, this is what they're going to do to us. Thank you.
So, yeah, good question, and it's a very important one. So I'm no longer at Intel. I was there for 30 years. I'm now an independent speaker and consultant, but I still am in touch with a lot of people there, and I'm involved in a lot of forecasting work for a number of different organizations now outside of Intel. One of the ones that I have worked with is the Army Cyber Corps, who are looking at cyber threats. And the process that I use, that a colleague of old colleague of mine and friend of mine, Brian David Johnson, who is also a bald futurist, not branded like me, but he is also a futurist and he happens to be bald. He came up with this process called future casting, which allows you to look at how trends intersect each other. You can use the same process, and he flipped it and called it threat casting. So yeah, you can use exactly the same tools to figure out what might the threats be. And I was participating with the Army Cyber Corps, the Secret Service, some FBI people, and the context was, how might AI be used against us? Could you be fooled by an AI? How do you trust the output of an AI? How could that be spoofed? How could that be used to coerce someone to do something that they otherwise wouldn't do? So yes, the process can work both ways. And as a futurist, we're trained to ask two basic questions. Question number one, what is the future that we want to build? And I talked about a lot of that today. The other side, because I only had an hour, is what is the future that we want to avoid? And it's an equally important question. We don't always spend enough time on it. Remember that plastic dinosaur that I said there's the cost pressure to build that as cheaply as possible and push all of the performance into the cloud? That same cost pressure will mean that we will design literally billions of IoT devices and not put enough security measures in them. So there may be at some point a place for regulation to say that if you connect some sort of device, here's the basic level, certification, not regulation, but a certification that says this meets a certain level of strength when it comes to being rigorous on a security standpoint. But that is going to probably happen once something bad goes down. And I don't know what that event will be, but these are other things that futurists look for, is what is the trigger event that leads to a change in behavior. And so that's sort of a long, rambling answer to your question, but you must think about the Steve Vader side as much as the Steve Kenobi side. Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much to our panelists for your time and your thoughts. Thank you for the audience for coming. That wraps this up, unless there's any more questions. Nope. So thank you much. And Joe.